Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Questlove Supreme. What up, Big Bill?
Man, it's a good day. It's a Philly day. I'm excited.
Whenever you're quiet, I feel like you're working on something monstrous. What are you working on?
I feel like you think that because I have all this gear behind me that I do a lot of cool shit, but I don't, and none of it works. It's just for looks. Just looks good.
Oh, is this for show?
Yeah, same.
No,
thing,
there's no potential movie or Broadway project coming up.
Not at the moment. I'm too busy watching boy band scam documentaries about Lou. What's his name? That guy. Anyway, that's what I've been doing today.
There's a new documentary.
Yeah, it's on Netflix. It's called Dirty Pop. And it's pretty
nice.
Great. I recommend it.
I'm in it. All right. Say no more. Steve, what up, bro?
Good morning.
How's it going?
It's AM, so I don't know what.
Steve doesn't do morning. You know that.
That sounds about right. All right. No. That sounds about right. What can I say? As a podcast host, as a writer of several books, liner note obsessive, author of many a 1920 paragraph Instagram post. That's understating it. What can I say? Even as the world record holder for podcast show intros, lengthy intros, it's an understatement to say that I have an obsession with journalism. And of course, the answer to that is duh. Of course, you know, I'm probably one of the few casts that sees the journalist or the person that brings the story as just as important as the artist making the story. You know, there in my childhood there were equally influential music periodicals that that took up space just like the records did. So I just didn't grow up with records, but you know, I grew up in a house with serious music periodicals. And then I think in my senior year of high school, something clicked in kind of in the summer of 88. I ran across a magazine with LL Cool J on the front cover. And not knowing what it was, sort of like a last minute purchase, I purchased a bunch of records, and there's magazines at the register at Sound of Market Street. On my way home, reading that periodical, I got to admit that the writing style was a little bit different than what I was used to, because there was no internet in 88. So pretty much I had to rely on the words of anyone working at those magazines like Right On or Blackbeat or Word Up. You know, there'll be an occasional blurb in mainstream media, but it was always just one degree of, you know, either Run DMC's cover story for Rolling Stone, like, see, not all rap is violent, you know, that sort of thing. I always saw that the hip hop coverage in the late 80s in very early 90s, almost the equivalent of letting a vegan judge a Texas barbecue contest. And the aforementioned periodical comes along and starts treating the music that I love and that we all love as high art. And I went from casual reader to obsessive in about 20 minutes. And so the friendships I've cultivated in the name of that magazine, the business partners I've chosen because of that magazine, my art direction in life, the art I've created, even those actual participants of that magazine become lifelong friends of mine. For me, the story of The Source magazine, which, you know, I still refer to as hip hop's Bible. You know, our guest today was very, very instrumental in bringing that periodical, that religion, that culture, that way of life, and all those writers and all those artists and all those photographers, you know, in our world. And, you know, it's rare to read any in-depth interviews. I've yet to hear his side of the story of his brief stint there between 87, 88 there until 1994. Not to mention his other ventures as well. And he's given us the honor to pick his brain for this episode. John Sheck, finally, you come to Questlove Supreme.
What's it's up, my brother? Pleasure. It's my pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Ahmir. Really appreciate that.
Sorry, great, I hope I didn't embarrass you.
Not at all. I'm a big fan of the podcast. I was getting my rap ready. I guess we're not going to do that today.
Nah.
It's hard to do. Low key got a rap ready, but I can hold it till the future. It's all good.
Gotcha. Yeah. Were you okay, I see your NS10s behind you. Where are you broadcasting from?
I am in my office in Las Vegas, where we work with a lot of DJs, because one of my partners is a guy named Eddie Mack, who has a DJ agency here. So this is kind of our office headquarters here in Las Vegas. It's very close to the Las Vegas Strip. And yeah, there's a lot of DJs here, a lot of hip hop here, a lot of vinyl here, all that good stuff.
It is. Yeah. You're the first person to tell me, back in, I think I went to what was the convention that used to come out there, the fashion convention, like
Magic.
I went to the Magic convention once, and you told me like, yeah, I'm living in Vegas, and I'm like, Vegas? Who lives in Vegas? Like where we only see Vegas as a 5-cent slot machine and nothing else.
Yeah, like, most people come and go, and like 3 days is the max. That's like kind of the typical experience. Like 72 hours are like, get me the hell out of here. Right. I ended up staying for like 25 years, but it is what it is.
You were the one that told me that not only Vegas is the future, but you predicted even then. And I think this was maybe 98, 99. Definitely wasn't 2000 yet. And you told me like, yo, like, I predict that Vegas is going to be the epicenter, taken away from Los Angeles. Like, I guarantee you. And at first I thought, I don't know about all that. But you actually turned out to be right, man. Like, practically my entire community of friends that I'm used to running into in Los Angeles have moved to Vegas and made Vegas their home. Like, what was it about? Because you were like one of the earliest people who saw the potential in it. Like, I'll say for a lot of us, Vegas just got cool, even in music terms. When I tell the band like Las Vegas, it's always like a cheesy term, like,
like New York City,
jazz version of shaving a haircut. That sort of thing. But like, what was it about Vegas that told you, especially 20 years before the fact, that this will be the new spot?
I found a lot of things about Vegas appealing. What we do best out here is music, food, the weather for those who can take the heat, and it's actually a pretty good, easy lifestyle if you can find your niche out here. But when it comes to music, I mean, obviously that was sort of my one of my main reasons for being here. I saw a lot of opportunity. I got here right as the sort of nightlife wave was beginning with a lot of DJs. And I kind of jumped right in and started like bringing a bunch of my friends out here, like DJ AM, Mark Ronson, Stretch Armstrong, DJ Premier, people like that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Vegas is, has come a long way in the time I've been here. And now I think it really is one of the best music cities in the world, for sure. I mean, there's so much here, whatever you're into, whatever genre you're into. If you want to see live acts, if you want to see DJs, if you want to just have a nice meal and listen to some good music, we got it all covered.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask the question that everyone wants to know, and obviously I must be doing the shit wrong, because when I come to Vegas, like in my version, I don't know which character I am, but I don't know if I'm the guy in the PG-13 film that's hoping that it happens, or the guy in the rated R film that is going to make it happen. Like for me, the idea of Vegas, the idea of Vegas, quote unquote Vegas, baby, the idea of what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Is that truly a myth, or is that real? Because my again, I could be doing it wrong. Part of me is actually maybe glad I'm doing it wrong. Like what I don't know won't kill me. But is the idea of that whole what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas thing, is that real or not?
I think over time, I think everyone finds their own Vegas. That's a phrase I like to say, meaning pretty much early on when you first visit, you have that all out wild experience where they go to extreme in one direction or another. And then over time, whether you're a visitor or whether you're a resident here, you begin to assimilate into a newer kind of environment, and in the sense that nothing really shocks you anymore, nothing really surprises you, and you can kind of just take it all in stride. And I think I hit that a while back, and for people who are frequent visitors, the same thing happens. You stop having those extreme moments, and you kind of just settle into like a good experience, and you kind of find your niche. You find the places you like to go, or you're here for a particular music event, or something like that. So yeah, I mean, there's some truth to that, but I think that usually refers to people who are more beginners in Las Vegas. And then once you become more experienced, you take it all in stride, basically.
Okay, so for your taste, like what's the restaurant? What's your restaurant of choice?
Well, I'm pescatarian, leaning vegan, vegetarian. So, I look for those kind of spots. There's so much, what I will say is that if I'm going to give one restaurant recommendation, I'm just going to recommend a whole block, which is Spring Mountain Road, which is very close to the Strip. It's Vegas's Asia town. And there's literally hundreds of amazing restaurants there. And most tourists never see it because it's not in a casino. The typical experience is most people will come to Vegas and they'll check into one of the casinos.
Stay on the Strip.
They'll literally never leave that one building because every casino has like 15 restaurants and 3 nightclubs and the pool and the gym and everything else. So, but what I recommend to people is you go like literally 5 minutes away from the Wynn is a street called Spring Mountain Road. And on that street is literally hundreds of amazing restaurants. And among those hundreds, there's about a couple dozen that are world-class, Japanese, Thai, Vietnamese, Korean, etc. So that's my recommendation.
So you're saying that, for us to stay on the Strip is the equivalent of people visiting New York and just staying in Times Square and really not.
Yeah, it's like kind of like staying in Times Square, but to some extent. I mean, listen, I'm not going to say that. I work with a lot of casinos, I work with a lot of restaurants, I go to a lot of restaurants. So, I'm not going to say that there's nothing to be found there because there's a ton of amazing places. But over time, most locals tend to avoid the Strip unless absolutely necessary. That's kind of the process that every local goes through, is eventually weaning yourself away from the Strip and towards like the regular Las Vegas city, which is, it's a pretty significant city. But yeah, I mean, obviously I get why most people come here and they just kind of check into one of these places and stay there because that's what that's what they expect you to do. And it's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But as time goes on, you start to see sort of a wider frame.
All right. Next time you're my tour guide. So.
Let me take you off the Strip. I'd be happy to do it, man. Happy to do it.
Okay. Awesome. All right. So I want to get into your story because, I've heard practically anyone that has crossed paths of that institution known as the Source magazine. I've spoken to in great detail, but I've never ever really picked your brain just about the whole modus operandi of the place and whatnot. So
sure. Yeah. I mean, let it be known that we've known each other for quite a long time, but we've actually, we've never really had like a deep talk about it, which is great. Exactly. Let's do it here. This is a good time to do it. Yeah.
Well, for starters, you and I have something in common. We're both from the city of Philadelphia. So
Oh yeah, absolutely.
so
No doubt.
basically, talk to me about your beginnings before uh you start the magazine. Like, what was your life basically before in the first half of the 80s?
Okay, so I grew up in Center City, Philadelphia, which is, literally like where the downtown part of Philly is, for those who don't know.
Yeah.
And I went to school at a place called Friends Select, which is a Quaker school on 17th and the Parkway.
Yeah.
I was there my whole childhood from kindergarten through 12th grade. So every
Word?
single day of my life, yes, I would walk, through the city, past Chestnut Market, JFK, and then to the school. Being a young kid who was drawn to music at a very young age. I used to listen to the radio a lot, all the stations, from the pop stations to the rock stations to the urban/black music stations. And I would walk through the city, and you can't help, especially in the 80s in Philly, you can't help but soak up culture, just walking around.
Mhm.
I'm talking about fashion, music, just sort of energy. And I when we talk about music, there I was in the city that was creating all this music. I didn't even realize what was happening around me. In other words, like some of my earliest memories about music are like hearing like "Wake Up Everybody" in like a pizza place in like 1977, I guess. And I didn't realize it was made in Philly. I had no idea, but I just knew that it was something, when you hear a song like that with that much, emotional depth, it kind of rewires your brain a little bit, I think. Not just that song, all the Philly soul that was around us. I also, so basically I was drawn to music at a young age, but it wasn't until I was about in 11th grade at Friends Select that I decided to do something about it. I had been spending a lot of time prior to that listening to records. I was really into disco. Disco was kind of my first love of music. First record I ever bought was Chic, Yowza, 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 Dance, Dance, Dance.
Fun fact,
Yes,
according to Nile Rodgers, the
yes.
voice of Yowza, Yowza, Yowza is Luther Vandross.
Wow, I did not know
Deep
that.
cut.
That's awesome.
Fun fact. Yes.
I love it. I remember I bought the 45 on Atlantic Records. It was like a red label, and I would listen to it constantly. I will confess that I loved all disco, including the Bee Gees, the Village People, everything else.
We all did.
Yeah, we all did. Yeah, it was just great music. And the thing is, for me, though, I also loved rock. So, like, back when there used to be disco versus rock, there was a huge conflict in like the late 70s. Where you had to pick a side, and I could never pick a side. It was weird. Like there was like half the kids were like, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, Queen, some of those groups ended up doing disco records too. But basically, there was this big conflict. I could never pick a side. I always liked both. And I just like wrote it out that way. But then when I got to 11th grade, I was so into hip hop at that point. It's like 1984. And Run DMC, the Fat Boys, Houdini, the Beastie Boys, not yet the Beastie, LL Cool J, Curtis Blow. I loved all those groups, and I decided that I wanted to work in radio. So I forced my way into the building at Power 99 FM, WUSL.
You used to work for Dave Marsh at Power 99. Dave, what's his name at Power 99?
Oh, no. Well, there was a
Dave Allen. Sorry.
Yeah, that was I think he was the PD.
Yeah.
When I was, but when I walked in, there was a newly hired MD, and his name was Tony Gray.
Okay.
And he called his on-air name, and this is kind of silly. His on-air name was Mike Jackson.
Mike Jackson?
Remember Mike Jackson?
The man who invented the Power 9 at 9?
That's correct. That is correct. Mike Jackson. So Mike Jackson
he had a whole like that's an alias.
Yeah, like can
I
you imagine
always
picking that as your alias? I mean, it kind of doesn't make sense, but that's what he
smart. No,
did.
smart. Okay.
Yeah, okay. It's up to you. It depends how you look at it, right? It was so I walked in. It was kind of like one of those remember in Wayne's World when what's the guy's name? Like Handsome George or something like that, or Gorgeous
Yes.
George. And they walk in and he has this huge voice and they walk in, there's like a very kind of little guy and he
Right.
looks kind of nerdy. It
Right.
was very similar to that. It was very similar. He had this,
I never knew what he looked like, yo.
yeah, he had this like very powerful like voice. He was doing the evening drive. So he was on from, I think like 6 to 10.
Mike Jackson on the Power 9 at 9. Oh my God.
Exactly. So
The
I walk
hours,
in.
wow.
Yeah. And so he was like, he was kind of like a hero of mine, but he had just started like, I think a few months before I got there. And it just so happened when I walked in and I wanted to be an intern and he saw me and he was kind of like a slim, kind of, smaller dude. He had hair almost like a perm, but it was like a Gumby perm. If you can imagine those two things going together. And anyway, he was very friendly to me I was totally nervous and like he took me in and he started talking to me and, basically we hit it off like that first night and I started working for him like literally immediately. And back then it was like the radio station was, they used carts, which looked like 8-track tapes.
Yes.
And you would like and so the first job was there was like a pile of carts like on the floor with like 200 of them. And I had to like sort through them and organize them and stuff like that.
Okay. Can you explain something to me? Because,
Yeah.
okay, so I am from the era. I mean, I've seen every era of radio, but first doing the radio, I do remember those 8-track carts. Like, one, what was the purpose of it? Two, like, who would do those edits? Like, was the purpose to store as much music as you can on that particular cart, or like
when I was there, there was a combination. When I was there, they were still playing records for the most part, but some songs when they made into heavy rotation would be on a cart. I think the main purpose of it, also all ads and all drops, all announcements, all bumpers, all that kind of stuff was on the cart. But I believe the reason they used them was because when it finished, it would end up right on cue. So it automatically, like you hit play, it would play whatever was on there, and then it would stop, and it would be immediately queued up again. So I think it was just the convenience of having, you pop it in, and you know it's going to be right on cue. I believe that
so
was
you
the
don't have to
reason
look for the spot where.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
So they're like, we have to play a song. So you just hit play, and you know it's like, it's always on cue. So I'm pretty sure that was the reason that they used them, or that was the purpose of the invention. But that was also a time, and we can talk about this maybe as we get into it, but that was when the DJs were doing edits on reel to reel. So I actually witnessed some of the most amazing artistry you've ever imagined with a razor blade and like a reel to reel tape with
Good
those
old days.
Can I ask you something?
Yes.
Do you know who Yaman Supermix is?
Oh man, I'm so glad you said that name. He was the king of the tape edit.
He was our Latin, what do you call it? Our Latin Rascals.
Latin Rascals. He
Was
was
the
our
Latin
Latin
Rascals?
Rascals.
Oh my God, I'm about to lose my
Yes.
mind.
And I witnessed him making edits. I saw him in person making edits, and I saw exactly. And he's totally forgotten. Nobody remembers. He was
Who and where is he?
as I recall, he was like an Arabic gentleman, kind of coming up in the same exact style as Latin Rascals in New York City. And he would make these phenomenal. I mean, like I would walk into that room and there would be like all the segments of tape would be hanging on the wall because he would remember like, oh yeah, this is the chorus over here. This is the bridge. This is the whatever, and he would go in with that blade and there would be like that little piece of metal that you would put the tape in and you'd slice and then you'd like put like a white piece of like masking tape like together.
Right. Uh-huh.
And and then the other thing is when they had a big loop, they have to put like a pole on the other side of the room and the tape would go all the way through the tape machine, then all the way back around the pole and back again so that you could get the right length for the tape,
Right.
So yeah, and then as you'd watch it go by, you'd see all the little white strips, like all the edits, and it was amazing. Yeah, that was like a crazy artistry that a totally forgotten art form of those manual tape it.
Yaman Supermix was like Pro Tools before Pro Tools. Like whenever
Absolutely.
he would do a mix, then I'd get on, like we would have like 3 JVC ghetto blasters at the crib,
Yeah.
and I would try to emulate whatever I heard him doing, because that's how I thought people made remixes and shit. So
I mean, with a cassette, you'd make a pause tape to try to make it like an edit. Yes, we all did that too. I did the same thing.
Anything to hear any of that stuff again, man. That's
He
like
was
my
brilliant.
childhood.
He was absolutely brilliant. There was also a Philly DJ named Jeff Mills.
Yes,
not
Jeff,
the same.
Jeff Mills.
Jeff Mills,
Yeah.
Mills.
That is unbelievable, man.
Yes, exactly. So that's the world I walked into when I was just like a high school kid. And it was sort of the aftermath of when Power 99 had become a black station already, but they still had a lot of remnants of sort of their, CHR, like kind of like dance music,
Barbara Summers and all those people.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Jeff Wyatt is another name that was back then.
Yep.
But anyway, so Tony Gray, aka Mike Jackson, and I, we hit it off, and I started working for him. And I was also very close friends with JoJo Davis, who was the nighttime Night Flight 99. It was the overnight kind of the Philly's version of the there was a Quiet Storm. The way it would work is Mike Jackson would play from 6 to 10. Then there was a Quiet Storm, and then Night Flight 99 would come on, and that was like the overnight shift.
Yeah.
And JoJo was actually a relative of Miles Davis. I think it was his nephew.
I never knew that.
Yeah, and he was the one that was, it was like when I was with Tony Gray. He was a very serious dude. He was a hardworking, kind of not partying type guy. He would show up for work. He cared about the business. He was straight laced. Then I would leave for the Quiet Storm because that was actually no DJ. It was just like they were just playing like records, and that would be you'd hear like like Shirley Murdoch and stuff like that. And then
were all those like pre-taped or like done live?
I think there was someone in the studio playing records, but they had a list. I think they had like a playlist they had to follow.
Okay.
And they had the great sound effects with like the rainstorm, if you remember. And it would put you in the mood. But then I would come back. So I would leave with Tony Gray, and he would leave, and I would leave and go to a friend's house. And then midnight, I would come back to the station, and it was JoJo Davis, and that was when the party was on. So we would like hang out, and that was where we could get loose, and that was where I met all these people and talked about music and the whole 9 yards.
How influential as the intern, like even where I work now at 30 Rock, it's the interns here that keep me hip to what's next. You know what I mean? Like I'm in my 50s, but my interns here in their 20s, they're the first ones to yo, Quest, you up on this? You up on this? You up on this? So there's always the intern that knows what tomorrow is. Were you that voice for them?
To some extent, I think I was, because I was very into hip hop. So at that moment in time, hip hop had not really become the main programming. It was still, the programming was great. I mean, listen, it was the 80s. It was the best era of music, I think, of all time. But what was great about the programming was that it was very diverse and very funky and very, and I loved it, but there wasn't enough hip hop for my taste. So I was in there pushing low key on the hip hop side.
I was going to ask you, okay, so this is what happened. So when the spring of 85, my mother's side of the family is from California. Spring of 85, we do our pilgrimage to Los Angeles, and we'll stay out there for like 3 to 4 weeks. So say like a month or so. And, it's kind of different. It's very different. 85 Los Angeles was night and day from 85 Philadelphia. And even though Greg Mack and KDAY was, AM was the first 24-hour hip hop radio station, but they're playing a lot of their Malico records, like a lot of the West Coast stuff, like the Ronnie, what's his name, California, those out of part, like basically like post electro, that sort of stuff. And
LA Dream Team, stuff like
yeah,
that.
all
Yes,
that
yeah.
stuff.
Yeah,
Pre
yeah.
Dr. Dre shit. And so that's the summer of Toddy T's Batarang, right?
Yeah.
And they're playing it constantly playing it constantly. And so in August, when we get back to Philadelphia and I get on the block where all my friends are, and we're sort of just trading and comparing notes, yo, something happened in the summer of 85 in which suddenly hip hop was allowed
Yeah.
in the evening. And I don't know what a lottie dot. Do you know how stupid one has to feel when everyone's like, "What do you mean you don't know Lottie Dottie in the show?" And I'm like, "No, yo, it's about Batarang." Now, the way that LA people were acting to Toddy T's Batarang, I put it on for them, and they looked at me like it was the first time I witnessed like a cultural,
Yeah. The regional regional
a
differences in
regional difference.
Yeah, yeah.
And I played my song first, and they weren't impressed at all.
Yeah.
And then they played me Lottie Dottie, and they're taping off the radio. So this is how I know what a Power 9 at 9 is. Mike Jackson's #1 song is Lottie Dottie by Dottie.
Yeah.
You remember when the show and Lottie Dottie were like #1 for like
Of
almost
course.
9
Yeah.
months. So how does a record like that crack the mainstream in a way that pre-spring of 85, I'm only used to, Lady B show on Sunday for 3
That's right.
hours and
Mhm.
nothing else. Maybe
Mhm.
Drexel will have like an hour of it. But talk to me about like the inside of the machine. Like how are you able to penetrate that unpenetrable system?
So, you're right on the time because that was literally when I was getting involved there, 85. And as time went on, I actually took over that Power 9 at 9. I was the person that was compiling that was supposed to be based on requests. So there was kind of like there was
All
a balance there. So that
I'm
we
gonna
did
ask you
have.
the discombobulator boobulator question next.
We'll talk about MC Breeze, no problem. That's my buddy.
Okay.
But yeah, so I would make a chart, and in the beginning, they didn't really trust me to do it, but after I'd been there for a number of months, they saw that I kind of knew what I was doing, so they would let me literally make the whole top 9, and it was kind of like a little bit of science, a little bit of creativity, kind of mixed together. Like it would be the science part is they did have requests, and they did have a system for logging these requests. So you did see what was like actually the most requested. But as you know, those kind of move, it's kind of a backwards looking stat, like requests kind of can be almost like what's already a hit usually, you know what I mean? And so I had to also kind of bring in a little bit of the newness. And I'm not saying it was all me. There was a lot of forces in play. The biggest force is just it was a combination of Run DMC breaking down those big barriers. I think they were the biggest reason why hip hop broke through. But there was a lot of other records, Force MDs. I mean, like, Dougie Fresh.
Right.
And so it was like, yeah, it was just kind of, it just slowly happened. And so at some point along the line, but you're dead on correct in that the regular station rotation would not include these records. But during the Power 9 at 9, we were allowed to put in what the streets really wanted to hear. And then, of course, on Sundays with Lady B, that was an all out, that was like the center of hip hop in Philly, basically. That was the most important show. But, the big songs would break through and they would end up hanging around on the chart, on that Power 9 chart for a long time. And, one of the biggest got to be definitely what I think is, you could argue, one of the greatest 12-inch singles of all time is The Show and Lottie Dottie. I mean, that's like, you can't beat that,
It became a religion. And
it did. It was huge in Philly, huge, as big as can be. But you know what else was huge in Philly? And I'm curious to hear if you remember. Shout by Tears for Fears was massive in
Classic.
like
the Craig
white
G
and
version.
black world. Oh, the Craig G. That came up the other day. I was actually there the day that that one of the Goodmans showed up from Pop Art Records and dropped off that Craig G Shout record. I remember actually I was in the studio. Yeah, it was.
You got Pop Art stories.
I got Pop Art stories. Yeah,
Veronica stories. Yo, Like,
Yeah.
forget the source. We could just talk about your first 2 years at Power 99. Oh
Yeah.
man.
I mean,
So
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I was just going to say the thing that the point I do want to make though about those days was that, and this is something that has followed me my whole life. When we were deciding, when not me, when the station brass was deciding like what to program, there was this very open attitude. Anything funky was okay. So that was a time when you could turn on a black radio station and hear Tears for Fears. You could hear
mhm.
the Tom Tom Club and Talking Heads. You could hear Hall and Oates, and many other examples of stuff like that, which that has always been my kind of like DNA guiding philosophy is like, if it's funky, it doesn't matter who's making it, you know? And somewhere along the lines, it got more segregated, I think, like musically,
Yeah.
you know? But back then in the 80s, you know, those records were as big as like, you know, Alexander O'Neill or Sherelle or something like that. You know, they were just side by side.
Fun fact. The first time I heard this is a weird trivia moment. The first time I heard Shout on Power 99, I lived on Osage Avenue.
Wow.
I lived on 52nd and Osage Avenue.
Okay.
And every Philadelphian my age knows what happens on May 13th, 1985 on Osage Avenue.
Of course.
The bombings. So the thing was, because this drama has been brewing all week. You know, Jack Jones was like on his, it's almost like being live at Vietnam. Like he'd be behind the cars, like reporting. And it seemed contained. I mean, back then it was just about like, okay, there's gun exchange between the MOVE organization and the police. So when they dropped the bomb on top of the house, you know, for like 3 hours, it seemed like it was contained. But then when it spread to another block, then we started getting concerned. Like, okay, well, we live here, and this seems to be spreading. Like, how late will it be until it comes to our block? And there was a moment where our block captain, around like 11 p.m., kind of just gave the warning, like, look, you know, I'm in contact with the other block captains and whatnot. If they don't contain that fire, maybe at 3, 4 in the morning, we might have to vacate our crib. So it was almost like a pack what's important, that sort of thing. And I remember having the radio on while we were packing, like 2 or 3, in case we had to go to my grandmom's house or whatever. And I looked at the radio. I was like, wait, what the hell is Tears for Fears doing on Power 99? Like, it was just.
You remember hearing that song during the MOVE crisis, you're saying?
Right.
Yeah, yeah. I remember, of course, that was a major moment for Philly. We were all like, you know, it was live. It was covered live. You know, there was like live shots.
Right.
Yeah, that was crazy. That was a crazy moment.
So in general, and what was your Philly nightlife experience like? Like were you ever an attendee of about to call it the Spaghetti Warehouse after midnight? Were you
the mid? They used to call it the mid.
Word?
Yeah, the mid was like the abbreviation. I was too young to get into after midnight, but I would, and that's a lot. Now I'm too old for almost everything, but back then I was too young to get into after midnight. But I remember hanging outside, and I met all the people involved, and there was actually a white guy that was like, I think, running after midnight. I can't remember his name. And if you remember, there was this the most incredible LL Cool J freestyle came out of After Midnight, and it's like he's rhyming over Tila Rock, It's Yours.
It's yours.
Yeah, and it's like that was like magic. That shit was so powerful and so amazing.
Last year, when we toured with LL, the amount of begging we had to do to get him, he only did it once. Like that was going to be his encore before we did Rock the Bells together.
Wow.
But he pulled that one out of the hat. He's like he has zero clue or how much of a spiritual experience that was for most of the tri-state area and the amount of tape trading and that sort of thing.
Oh, forget it. Listen, and I figured this is going to come up later, but I saw the Force tour when you guys came to Vegas. And
Okay.
man, oh man, you guys. I mean, I've seen literally probably hundreds of rap shows in my life, but I'm serious. That was the greatest rap concert I have ever seen in my life, and that includes the Fresh Fest 1, Fresh Fest 2, all the classic Public Enemy concerts, all that. And
Thank
the
you, man.
reason is you deserve it because it was so well choreographed, so well run. There was no downtime. It was like constant action on the stage, and with those three Philly guys in the middle, it was just it was flawless. And I think
You,
like you really raised the bar for what a rap concert can be.
you know
Agreed.
what? Yo, dude, it's hitting me right now as we speak. Right now as we speak. One of the key pivotal moments in Roots history. I think you probably you came to the Trocadero and witnessed your first Roots performance,
Mm-hmm.
and you gave me real constructive criticism, and I took it to heart and applied it. He was like, "Hey, it was dope, but listen, you got to figure out a way to engage your audience and grab them in." And you taught me about formatting. You said, you know, you guys are going heavy on the jazz drum soloing and all that stuff, but I think a dope thing y'all should consider is occasionally in your song, like pepper it like condiments, pepper it with hip hop references that people would know. And I'd never like we did that while we were a busking group. But
Yeah.
then we decided, when you're busking and you're playing for like 3 to 4 hours on the corner, you're going to run out of shit. So, it was easy to tell your upright bass player, all right, start with excursions. All right, let's go to bugging out. Okay, let's go to rap promoter. All right, let's go to like we would literally go through the entire tribe discography because it's just drum and upright bass. But once we got like, okay, we're not playing on the streets no more. Let's just do all original material. And you told me, it's like, yo, man, like, y'all got to bring back. And you said hip hop 101. And I had a meeting the next day with the dudes, and they were like, all right, well, let's see what happened. And that single-handedly, like, I totally forgot that you kind of were the spark that started that moment of me figuring out the show as in format terms and how to pace things and all that stuff. I totally forgot that.
Ahmir, how often do you call audibles during a show? Do you do that ever? Like in the middle of a show, like you feel the crowd, you feel a thing. Like if all of a sudden LL's like, "Let's do this." Do you ever audible? I've never seen you do that, but I know you talk all the time to the band.
It's so weird, man, because I come from the Prince school of presentation. George Clinton used to always joke that Prince would rehearse his spontaneity. You know, like, and do I do I ever allow for a moment that requires that? This past weekend, in which of this taping, I will call it the Microsoft Gate domino effect. There was a Microsoft update effect
Yeah.
that affected
Oh,
any
God.
business that used Microsoft, including airports and hotels and whatnot. So as a result, this past weekend, we were doing fragmented root shows. Like, somehow we went from a trio to Earth, Wind, and Fire. Like, there's 11 of us now. And so we were kind of reduced. We were reduced to a 7-man group, which, because I am a somewhat of a former creature of habit. If there's a cog that sort of, not, if there's a monkey wrench thrown my way, yes, I'm able to adjust. Do I like that? I hate it. For me, I want the well-oiled, well-rehearsed version of perfection for everyone to see it. But I will say that in the last month or so, I'm purposely calling shit. Like, while Reek is mid-third verse, I'm like, yo, do you remember Without a Doubt from Things Fall Apart? And he'll be rhyming. Like, Tariq has the ability to communicate with me as he's still rhyming and
Wow.
shake his head. Yeah, I know. or he'll say like two verses, like I know that much, and then download a Saturday Night real quick by Schoolie D. Just take the drum break from the beginning. Like literally in the last month and a half or so, I've been sort of in that place to see if I can leave my comfort zone, because right now we have way too much material, and especially with these records that we have coming out in 2025, like I'm gonna have to literally throw this entire perfect show away and start all over again. So this time I'm looking forward to it. Previously, I had dread, like, oh man, we got to build it from the beginning. But I feel as though that's my life lesson, like pivoting and that sort of thing. So
that was why the Force tour was so great. Was Tariq was the greatest hype man in the history of hip hop. I mean, there's nobody ever who can. He's a center MC, he's the star, but then when it's time for him to be the hype man, he's the greatest hype man of all time. And, you guys got so much out of like a Rakim, who's, not necessarily known for being a great live performer, but you guys certainly worked. So you got the max you could get out of a lot of these people. And also the Stro Elliott aspect was another thing, because you had, real 808 and all that stuff on there. And like, you figured it out. You figured out the formula. Whereas, in other rap shows of the past, there used to be long delays and, miscommunication, no choreography, et cetera, et cetera,
I almost feel guilty for it, because really the whole purpose of that tour was just like Tariq and I would just look at each other like, yo, man, like, do you fucking believe, like, we used to dream about this at high school, like playing with our favorites. And really, and the thing is, I also wanted to show not even the audience, but I wanted to show the artists themselves that, I know there's this whole myth that, hip hop is such a young man's game. And, once you're 38, 39, 40, then you're irrelevant and you're not important and you're disposable. But I believe that creatively in the studio and on the stage, there's still room for improvement, room for being just as dope as you were when you were first 23. You know what I mean? So whatever we can do to explore that those possibilities, I'm with that. So when did you leave Power 99?
When I graduated from high school in 1986, that was the end of my Power 99 time. There was, what year was it when the story you just told about when I saw your show and made some comments? What year was that? Was that like 1991, 92?
That was 93.
93. Okay.
Us and Master Ace were at the layup was kind of like a view from the undergrounds, whatever those cartoons, whoever like C's and Tramp and all those guys.
Hayes and C. Yeah. Good
right.
Call. Yeah.
Philly guys, like they had one of the very first examples of what I call like your hip hop shop. Now every city has a hip hop shop where there's the t-shirt and the gear. But, if you wanted to get fresh Jive shirts or your skateboard gear or, what Supreme is now.
Yeah.
That's, so Keith McPhee, our longtime production manager, owned one of those hip hop shops, and he used to work at Sound Market, and he organized a show. And I think, it was us, Master Ace. I think Onyx made their debut in Philly that night, but you guys came, and I was like excited, like, yo, the guys from the Source are here. Oh my God. Like, I think that's the first time we had like our first rehearsal. We never rehearsed. We were just like, just go off the top and whatever. And I think the nervousness of preparing something like sort of took us off our game, where we were a little too serious about it and you told us like, yo, I like, y'all didn't do the things that I heard about you guys doing. And I was like, yeah, you're right. Like, I was over preparing, and I learned to bring back hip hop 101. So
nice. Now, do you before we leave Philly, I just want to just mention one more part of Philly, which is did you ever hear of Rubber Park? Does that name ring a bell at all?
Rubber Park?
Rubber Park was a a park that, like as the name implies, was covered in like a rubber substance. It was down on Delaware Avenue, kind of near South Street, like Bainbridge, around like Bainbridge and Delaware Avenue. Back, I'm talking about in like 85, 1985, 84, 85. That was where I got my. It was past South Street. You'd have to walk. It's right along the river. Like when you remember how there used to be like parks and things right along the river there.
Mm-hmm.
And that was where I got my first dose of real hip hop culture. That was where, people would breakdance, graffiti, rap, all of it. Not DJ, but
is this like Second Street or Delaware Avenue?
Delaware Avenue, like it was like facing the water, like right, like close to the water.
You know what? I'll be honest with you, because of crack era, like after that limb bias story broke out, my dad and mom were like super vigilant. Like before that Oprah theme comes on, your ass better be in this crib and da 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 da. So like,
well, you're like 4 or 5 years younger than me, so I think that's probably why. I wasn't that old either, but I was making my way down there. Right. But that was that. The reason I mentioned is just because no one ever mentions it, and it's like that was one of the first places in downtown Philly that real hip hop culture emerged. It was because there's a proximity to South Philly. There's a lot of neighborhoods in that area where there was real hip hop culture, and kids would gather in that park. And that was a time when I was like just consuming all the records, like sort of all the big names like Fat Boys, who don't get enough love, by the way.
You're right.
I love the Fat Boys. I was listening to "Can You Feel It" yesterday, which is one of my favorite songs.
Right.
I'm pretty sure Larry Smith produced that. I'm not exact. I think so.
Curtis Blow, but adjacent. Curtis
okay.
and Larry were adjacent.
Yeah. But yeah, anyway,
they told me that was his first record he ever purchased.
Can You Feel It?
The very first Fat Boys record was the first album that Jay-Z
ever. The album, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was it. I was just curious if you had heard of that locale in Philly.
Nah, like really, I didn't start. I only hung with adults. Like if I had free time, I was in the family business, traveling with my dad a lot. During school time, I always came straight home, never allowed to hang out. And then kind of when I met Tariq, that's when the sort of range were like lifted a little bit, where maybe I can go to a movie or that sort of thing. But like my first real act of rebellion was, yo, let's go busk on South Street,
Right.
Because even then the thing was like, wait, take my drums on South Street? My dad will kill me. Like it was that type of atmosphere. So
well, South Street was, for those who were from back in the 80s, South Street it didn't have a lot of hip hop. When I first started hanging out there, it was all punk rock. It was a punk rock place. And they had that Zipperhead record clothing store, and there was a record store right by there. I would go to Jim Steaks. I live very close to Jim Steaks, so I would go to Jim Steaks like all the time. And then, even just by being there on South Street, I wasn't really a punk rock guy, but I got into it because it was all around. And it was, it was happening at the same time as hip hop, as we all know. So there was a pairing there, there was some connection. So I was, exposed to a lot of punk rock at that stage, but it wasn't until later that it became more of like a hip hop street. But in the beginning it started as a hippie place, back in the day. And then it evolved into counterculture, which at that time, punk rock was
my sister was slightly older. So
yeah.
She would hang on South Street with her girlfriends, and there was like that ice cream spot, Once Upon a Porch or something like that.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Like I remember South Street when it was actual, like the Village, like counterculture. And then
totally. Yeah.
Then the Gap and Tower Records came, and then
yes, exactly.
Starbucks, and then
fucks anywhere up.
Right. So great. Well, if you're French Select, and obviously, of course, this makes you Ivy League material. What were your other college options?
I was gonna
like, why didn't you choose Penn? Wait, what'd you say?
Harvard. No, Harvard. Why'd you choose Harvard?
Well, okay. I
And
had
what was
some.
your essay about? That's very
Or where'd you
important.
want to be?
What were your
Okay.
SAT scores? I want to know all the shit, Shecky. Let's get it.
Okay, so what happened was when I got to senior year, I was kind of living this dual life because I would go and hang out with all the Power 99 people. And I would still go to school every day. I was kind of doing both. I was burning the candle at both ends kind of thing. And I was able to be, I was a good student. For the most part, and particularly with English. I was like I was a English major type guy. I was reading and writing and focusing on books and stuff, that kind of thing. My first, one of my first, in addition to working at Power 99, I also started writing about hip hop at a very like early stage, like in like 84, 85. I was writing articles for not only my school newspaper, but also there was a newspaper on South Street. It was called I can't even remember what it was called. Maybe the South Street Star, possibly.
Really?
But
It was like our
yeah,
Village Voice or
it was like
something?
a Village Voice type. Exactly. It was like
Okay.
a Village Voice. It didn't last probably that long, but so I was starting to write what ended up being what I do with the source. I started at in Philly, writing about rap, and I would attend. It was mainly because I was going to the concerts and I was writing about that. So like, Fresh Fest 1, Fresh Fest 2. There was a concert called the Philly versus New York battle.
I remember that.
You remember that? Okay, I
I
was
remember
there.
hearing about it, but I wasn't there.
Yeah.
Okay, wait. Just I'm having I'm one of those hip hop sages, elders, whatever you want to call me. That
You don't say.
whatever you want to lightly insult me with. What there will be some times where like I'll revisit something from 30 years ago that I swore basically the Mandela effect. Uh are you are you familiar with that term, the Mandela effect?
No, what is
No,
that?
but I like it when you refer to yourself as Mandela, though. Here we go. Let's
Wait,
go.
wait. You guys don't know what the Mandela effect is?
I've never heard of this in my life.
Okay, so this is what people are just learning. So the Mandela effect is kind of like maybe a good version of an urban legend. Like basically, if it's a widespread, if a false memory, and this stems from, I think the Mandela effect started with people thinking that the Mandela funeral was televised. Like I could have sworn that happened, and it didn't happen.
Hmm.
But this is now a thing in like 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon was like a thing in pop culture.
Yeah.
Now the term the Mandela effect, where uh let's say I'm looking up right now. Okay, so some common examples of the Mandela effect have logical explanations, like Mr. Monopoly wearing a monocle because it complements his old-fashioned satirical. Like Mr. Monopoly doesn't wear a monocle, but we
Yes.
think he does.
I understand. So it's
Oh,
like a mistaken memory that everyone shares that is not necessarily a bad thing.
yeah. Yeah, it says
Yeah.
widespread false memories that large number of people or groups believe.
Got it.
Right. And just like in my version of it is, I will return to the storied summer of 1988 in which
Yes.
everything was changing our lives. But then I'll go back and listen to it, and then I'll be like, okay, was this sophomore album as good as I thought it was in terms of the folklore and whatnot? And let's just say that there might be a 50-50. Like if you were to put a gun in my head and basically say, like, all right, was this really a classic record, or were you just in your moments? I talked to this with LL. Like, you couldn't tell me shit about Walking with the Panther in '89. But when I let 5 years go by and went back to it, I was like, okay, I see where the ridicule came in. But I still hold that album precious to me, even though it's not as classic as my 17-year-old mind said it was. So I'm just asking you, were rap shows back then, as you remember it,
Hmm.
as legendary as we
Hmm.
thought it was, or was it just like, okay, shows are better now, even though the feeling is better then?
Yeah. So my answer is that,
I hope I made that clear.
and I don't know if did I lose you for a second there? I think so. But anyway, the answer, my take on it is, if you want to talk about 1988, I still believe to this day that 88 was the most incredible year for hip hop. I will always believe that. I think 88 was the pinnacle of hip hop. However, when it came to the shows, as I said, a lot of them were problematic. I mean, like, even though I was loving it, there was nothing for us to compare it to. In the early days in Philly, I would witness crazy scenes of, at the door, inside the venue. This is mostly at the Spectrum. That was most of the shows I would go to were at the Spectrum. You would see people getting thrown off the balcony. I mean, it would be crazy shit. Oh yeah. Oh, crazy stuff. I mean, throughout, most of those shows, there would be some crazy incidents. I mean, for the most part, they were fine. There was not, nobody died, I don't think, but
right.
They weren't well put together shows, but I think we were so starved for, back then there weren't very even videos really for most songs. So you were just kind of seeing the artist. All you saw was the record cover and then what was in the venue right there with you, So right. I think the moment was so I saw all those shows, all those amazing, and especially, and you want to talk about 88, Chuck D often refers to a certain show at the Philly Spectrum in 1988 as the greatest hip hop concert of all time. And I agree. It was, of that era anyway. It was right when Nation of Millions was red hot. And it was like perfect timing. Also on the bill was Rakim and Eric B., LL, Stetsasonic, I think Big Daddy Kane, like a whole bunch of great artists. But I just remember Nation of Millions being at the pinnacle of that moment, and just like the energy was, through the roof. I mean, obviously that record had captured the hip hop generation almost like no other.
The moment,
that album, yeah. So
were any of your hip hop contemporaries, those of age at least, even thinking of traveling up north to the Latin Quarter to witness it? Or
well, as you well know, if you grow up in Philly, there's always this sort of New York is like this big imposing like big brother like next to you. You know what I mean? It's like we always admired it, respected it, maybe feared it, maybe didn't understand. We wanted, we were jealous of it, but then we acted like we weren't jealous of it. There was this whole sort of thing where New York was the big city and Philly was like, the sixth borough of New York or something like that, and we were, always drawn to it for sure. I was probably too young during the prime of the Latin Quarter era to go there, but I did end up going there later. In like 88, I think I went there. Anyway, there was, there was always that sort of love-hate relationship. You remember when Double D and Steinsky had a record that was the that great mashup record?
Yes.
That was such a great song, right? It was one of the first mashups ever. And you remember at one part they used to go, "New York is red hot."
Yes.
New York is red
hot. Right.
And everyone in Philly used to go, "New York ain't shit. New York ain't shit." and then around that same time, you brought up MC Breeze, Discombobulator Boobulator, right? And then the flip side was a song called "It Ain't New York Because Philly is Stepping In." Yes. You know that song?
I know it. I have the 12-inch.
Yeah, the B-side to Discombobulator Boobulator, which was a song about, pro-Philly, anti-New York kind of sentiment.
Yes.
So yeah, it was always there as kind of like this big imposing place. And eventually all of us ended up making our way there one way or another, Yeah,
because I could have sworn that you were just straight up New Yorker. I didn't realize that you had Philly ties, and I was shocked. I was like, oh shit, okay, I see. So yeah, like your time at Harvard, when you're graduating, what do you want to be? What are you aspiring to be?
Graduating high school? Yeah, when I was graduating high school, I wanted to be I think I just wanted to be on the radio. I think that was kind of my main goal, or my main sort of. I knew I wanted to be around music, somewhere on the, I guess, on the business side of music or on the broadcasting side of music.
Mhm.
And I ended up, to answer your question, I got into Penn as well. And then they let you. Penn allowed you, if you lived in Pennsylvania and you applied to Penn, you got in early, then you could still apply to other schools. So once I got into Penn, then I just went for the number one place. And I got rejected from Yale and Princeton, but I got into Harvard.
You showed them.
Yeah. And but anyway, as I went there, I mean, I pretty much remember that my first real mission upon arriving at Harvard was radio station. So I went right down to WHRB, which was the school's radio station. It was primarily a classical station.
Of course it was. It's Harvard.
Yeah, it's Harvard. Yes, it was exactly as you would picture it. It had
Violins and harpsichords.
Yeah, exactly. That music was playing, right?
All the time.
Exactly. And so like they had an urban music department, but it was only on the weekends. But I signed up for it. There was a time slot allotted on like Friday and Saturday night for urban music. It had a very unfortunate name, the darker side, TDS. It had nothing to do with race. It was because it was at night. Okay. But it was still a dumb name. Yes. Right. Okay. So anyway, so I walk in and I'm like, listen, I came in with all, and now I got all the Power 99 experience under my belt. I feel like I know more than everyone else. I walk in and they say, okay, I'm filling out the form of like any past experience. And I write like, extra sentences like about all the stuff I've been doing with Power 99 and all this other stuff. And then they just put me in a room with all the other beginners and I have to just pay my dues and kind of like, be an intern for them. Like when you're a freshman, you kind of have to, just like in any program in college, you have to like pay your dues and, show that you're really serious about working there and all that stuff. So I start to go through that process. And, they didn't have a rap show. It was really just R&B, a straight R&B kind of thing. A little bit of dance music, I think. And
so mostly Anita Baker and Luther and
yeah. It was at night, so more up tempo stuff, I guess. But again, this is now. I graduated in '86, so now we're talking about like we're entering, one of the prime times of hip hop, golden era time.
Right.
I consider golden era, and everyone has their own definition. I consider golden era 84 to 94. That's just my opinion. Everyone has their own opinion, but that's my personal opinion.
Fair.
From Run DMC to like Biggie, Nas, to Nas, basically. Yeah, exactly. But at any rate, so I'm in there and I'm starting to like, do all the things I'm supposed to do to get involved with this radio station. And I'm in my dorm room one day, and I'm listening to Go See the Doctor by Kool Moe Dee. I remember I had that 12-inch vinyl. And I hear a knock at my door. And it's in the college dorm room, and I open the door and I see a white guy standing there with a red Fila sweatsuit and a mustache. And he's like, hey, I heard you playing that music. You into that kind of music? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, hey, I'm Dave. And it was Dave Mace, my future partner in The Source. But that was the very beginning. He walks in and we start talking, and we're two white guys who are there, who both love Black music. He was really into go-go music in particular, which I knew very little about. I mean, I knew like very little, like only like Chuck Brown and the Soul Searchers and the very basics. But
was he from the DMV?
He's from DC. Yeah. He's from
makes sense.
Yeah, he's from DC, and so we were kind of like sharing with each other, like, showing each other records and I think, my argument's a little bit more convincing if you're playing somebody rap records and they're playing you go-go records. I mean, there's way more records that you can play,
Right.
but we became friends, and you know, he at the time was working. In the beginning, he was working for the school paper, selling ads, and he had a knack for selling ads, as we soon all learned. And he was selling ads for like the Harvard Crimson, which is like a famous school newspaper. And I was like, hey man, you didn't realize that if you might not know, but if you come down to the radio station, you sell ads, they let you keep a commission. He's like, a commission? Because when you were selling ads over there, they didn't let him keep a commission. He's like, they really? And I was like, yeah, come on down. So I brought him down to the station, and, you know, he started doing the same thing I was doing, which is like go through the whole initiation process and so forth. But then pretty quickly, you know, to make a long story short, we kind of teamed up with a couple of other students, not famous people, just other students that were there at the time. And then, you know, we started doing this like rap show. I mean, it started very small.
Did you have to get permission to do this, or?
Yeah, we had to like go through the whole, it took about a year. It took about a year for us from when I first went down there to us actually getting a rap show. It was probably a year later. It took like a whole year. It was probably sophomore year that I actually got the show. And what I did was I went back to Philly and went to Power 99 and walked in and saw some old friends, walked right into the studio, the B room, like not the on-air studio, but the production studio. And I took every single one of Lady B's on-air IDs and drops and recorded them. So like, you're listening to Street Beat, you know, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And I went back up to Cambridge, and I was like, Dave, I got it. And I had a cassette, and it was, we're going to call our show Street Beat. And so I basically got, you know, there were other rap shows. Boston had like, you know, only on college radio, but there was like,
so you're saying if it's like, yo, this is Chuck D, and you're checking out the sounds of Street Beat, you took all the drops of like,
not artists, but more so like official, like the official radio IDs.
Who is that guy? Who is that guy?
There was some guy who was getting a lot of work. Yeah, there was that guy was getting a ton of work back then. There's always somebody like that, but you know, it was like, you know, cold rocking the planet with Street Beat, you know, all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And so that gave us an edge because, you know, now we have a very professional sounding like station, a radio show, you know, because we have these drops. So I came back. I remember just by randomly that around the same time I had the 12-inch for Mantronics and Just Ice. It was around that same time. Whatever, you know, there's a lot of those kind of records. So I was bringing records back that no one in Boston had heard yet. You know, right. I was basically like, you know, the connection to like getting records ahead of everybody, just because of really just going to like Sounds of Market, Funko-Mart, those kind of places.
So you weren't getting service yet. You would still have to buy.
Yeah, the station did get service, but yeah, but most of the good ones I had to buy. Yes.
So what was the general attitude or the atmosphere at Harvard for this music? Like, were they open, or was it just like a small 2% of y'all were really hip hop heads?
That's a great question. I mean, I think it was pretty reflective of the general population at that time, whereas hip hop was still an underground form of music.
Let me re-ask the question. Did you yourself see, because you're in college, did you yourself see the License to Ill effect happen at rapid speed?
License to Ill was an important inflection point. I think I'm glad you brought that up, because that happened actually right in 86, late 86, right? So that was when it was right around the time when I met Dave, honestly, and the beginnings of what would become The Source was happening. But License to Ill was a huge influence on not just me, but I mean, so many people, you know, were influenced by that record. I remember that I was so into it that I like even made it like a focus of one of my freshman year classes. Like, you got to write a paper about whatever you wanted, and I wrote about License to Ill. And that was an important record for me, also being a white Jewish guy from the city, kind of identifying. But the thing is that, and now
I didn't
Ahmir,
know they were white till way later.
I was about to say that exact thing. Everyone in Philly thought they were Puerto Rican. I don't
You
know.
just fessing, man. I don't because the Beastie Groove, Mike D sound like he was Puerto Rican. You just fessing, man. I don't even want to hear you just
Right,
fessing.
exactly. And for some reason, everyone you heard that they were Puerto Rican too, right? Because everyone in Philly is like, nah, they Puerto Rican, and I'm like, I guess I didn't know. Nobody knew because all we had was those Crimson Def Jam labels with no picture on it.
My science teacher is the one. He saw the photo and he's like, because we brought the album to school and we were obsessed with the whole the backwards eat me thing on the airplane wing.
Yes,
the wing of the album cover. And so when he looks at it and he saw the name Horowitz, he's like, oh, okay, these are some of my Jewish brothers. I was like, Jewish, like white? He's like, yeah. And I was like, no, man, white boys ain't that funky. They Puerto Rican. Like literally, it took forever. Like when I heard him speak on Soul Train, I was like, okay, Mr. Parrott might be right. They white. So.
White Jews can get down, Ahmir. What do you want to say?
I know this now. So how does what we know as the source get created in terms of it's starting out as a newsletter? First of all, like, does this show catch on like wildfire? Like,
so we started out with Dave and I and two other Harvard students who, because they were older and we were younger and they were kind of like, still like they had like, seniority over us.
mm-hmm.
But then, over time, one of them fell off and the other one fell off. And then eventually it was just me and Dave. That point, we did find that the show was starting to get popular. We would get a lot of phone calls, like way more than any, classical music fans aren't known for like ringing up the phone lines and making requests. So,
a fifth of Beethoven, please.
Yeah, I want to hear Tchaikovsky and E or whatever the fuck.
Right to spring right now.
Yeah. So we were like, the people were in the station were always like mind blown by the amount of calls we were getting. We had competition. There was like 2 or 3 other college radio rap shows at the time. So that was who we saw as our competition. Now, around this time, I should also mention that I also had a desire to be a rapper and heavily influenced by the Beastie Boys, of course.
Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine from Philly and I started a white rap group called BMOC. And we were, we didn't know what the hell we were doing, but we basically, somewhere along the line, another friend of ours, who I think, Ahmir, Will B of DJ of the Goats, who's one of my childhood lifetime friends.
Yes.
Will Braveman, yes, was going to NYU at the time. And we were all in college, in different colleges. And Will met a young man by the name of Brett Ratner. And Brett Ratner, I wish I never heard of him. But anyway, so what happened was...
Whoever that is. No.
Yeah, so Brett Ratner, who now, everyone knows as a Hollywood guy,
right.
and Me Too guy and all that stuff. But anyway, he had learned about our existence, heard one of our demos, was interested in us. So while the street beat on WHRB was starting to take off, I was also trying to be a rapper. So I was trying to write rhymes. I was trying to get beats. I was trying to make music.
How were your grades?
Well, as the story goes on, as we get deeper into it, we got through it, but I majored in the source, basically. That was like when I was at Harvard, I majored in the source, no doubt about it. Okay. I did get good enough grades to get through, but I wasn't like the top student or anything because we were just so focused on the magazine. But that was a little bit later. But so leading up to that,
you changed hip hop. You're forgiven.
Thank you. So leading up to that though, so I was this is related to your questions. How did the source start? So basically I was living in New York City in the summer of 1988. I was working for Ted Demi and Fab Five Freddy at Yo MTV Raps because I wanted, again, I I was just trying to get into the industry no matter what, you know. So I had arranged for a summer internship to work for Yo MTV Raps. I'm also pursuing my rap career at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So I got all these things going on.
How did you get in there? Like white kid walks through the door, they're like, yes, Yo MTV Raps. Like, that seems like a disconnect? Or
You know, I don't.
or did it work?
I think
don't
if anything,
remember.
that was a.
Or maybe that was the thing. I mean, I don't know.
If Larry were here, she'd be like, "Yo, that's
know,
an instant."
Yeah, I mean, you know, look, there was always the uniqueness of being white, and sometimes that worked in my advantage, being easy to, you know, the only white guy in the room sometimes. But
Same.
yeah, but that was, yeah, in this case, I honestly don't remember. I think I just wrote a lot of like mail, like, you know, pre-email. I wrote letters to people, and I was like, you know, I'm coming to New York, da, 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 da. And they're like, okay, you come work here. I didn't last long there actually, because they didn't treat me well. They didn't respect my knowledge of music.
Really?
They didn't. No, they treated me as low as you can get. I remember they famously, they were so sick of me spouting my opinions about rap because I knew more than them. I really did. Not Fab Five, but the other guys that were working there, they didn't know shit. Okay. And I walked in and I knew way more about music than they did. I knew it. I recognized it right away, but they didn't want to hear it. So they basically opened a door. It was like something out of a movie. You open a door and there's a tape. There's a room with like the entire history of Yo MTV Raps to that point, like all the raw footage is sitting on the floor. They say, hey, we got a job for you. Go into that room and watch every single tape and write down what's on it. So they shoved me in a closet.
What a punishment.
Like,
yeah, with hundreds of tapes of the very earliest like year of Yo MTV Raps. And I hated it. I also remember just
that
as
would have been my heaven. I'm sorry.
I know you would.
No, I know it sounds like it's not that bad, but I mean, you know, I want it to be where the action was, you know.
So
like
it's your equivalent of having to peel potatoes in the cartoon, like
yes,
the
it's
person
like
has
this endless,
to peel potatoes,
like an endless job that never with no sunlight, you know, just like in the room. So, so I also remember I was in the room the day that the Manifest video from Gangstar showed up. Words I Manifest. And if you remember that, I think that was their first video. I believe that was Gangstar's first music video.
Yeah.
I loved the song. I already knew it because I loved everything on Wild Pitch. I walk in and like, so if they pop it in and Fab Five Freddy's in the room, Ted Demi, rest in peace, who was the executive producer of Yo MTV Raps. And they play it and I'm like bopping my head going crazy. And I think it was almost like just because I liked it so much, they wanted to not like it. I swear. And so they go and they're like, yeah, I don't really like it. That guy's voice, it's just weird. They're like, I don't even get it. Like, why is he dressed like Malcolm X? And I don't even get it. You know, if you remember, he had like the Malcolm X glasses on.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. And so they rejected it. They rejected the video. They ended up playing it way later, like 6 months later. But at any rate, after all that, I kind of like got turned off and I ended up quitting that job. But in the meantime, I was still getting records and was super, super immersed in the music and also making music for whatever it's worth. And then Dave, meanwhile, and at this point now we're getting up to the summer of '88. So we had about 1 year of our rap show under our belt. And Dave stayed in Boston that summer while I was in New York. And Dave had an idea. He was like, hey, man, let's do something to promote the radio show. You know, like I got this idea. Tell me what you think. And he made a 1-page newsletter called The Source. And it was a yellow sheet, front and back. And I received it in the mail. And I was impressed. I mean, it was very simple. You know, it was just literally like one piece of paper, but I got it right away. It should be noted also that the first rap magazine I ever saw was actually from Philly. It was Mike Elliott. When I say rap magazine, I mean, you mentioned the Black Beats and the writer, but Mike Elliott, do you remember the name of that magazine? Crush magazine. It was called Crush.
He used to always advertise it on his, he had not a pay-per-view show, a public access show, right?
Yes.
Like
yes.
His own. Yes. I remember him always advertising Crush magazine, but I never got it. So you got this. So you got this newsletter, and
Yeah. So I had known about. I had seen one other intelligent rap. I had seen one other rap magazine that wasn't Word Up and Right On, which were obviously teeny bopper. Like, no one respected those. We all knew that. Crush was. I mean, maybe they served a purpose. I'm not trying to. They definitely came before me, but they weren't treating the music, in a serious way. Crush was the first publication I saw that was talking about real records. But again, it wasn't well put together. It only came out a few issues. I don't think it even really lasted that long.
Right.
But so I had some reference point as to what it could be, but Crush at that time was like kind of the best, the only one. I remember I had the editor of Crush who actually came in New York at that time to visit. I met with her. She came to my home at that time because I guess I wanted to write for her maybe. At any rate, so I did receive that one issue, and I thought it had potential. I went back to college in the fall of '88, and Dave and I connected, and right away we became business partners. And this is the truth. And all the rumors about how the source started and this and that, Dave and I took $100 each and put $200 into a bank account. And that was the beginning of the source. It was Dave and I putting $100 each. And I became the editor-in-chief in charge of all the content. And Dave became the publisher in charge of all the business of the magazine, which includes selling ads, which, as I mentioned, he had a particular skill at. And he turned out to be really, really good at that. So that was the beginning of the source. Now, the source was initially designed to promote our college rap radio show. It was all about, it was charts, some news, and it was very focused on Boston radio, which a Boston community and the hip hop, the fledgling, very small hip hop community there. The first few issues were kind of along those lines, and then we started distributing them in local Boston rap record stores, like Skippy White's is the most famous one. And that was the very beginning. And then, pretty quickly, as we started publishing, we published our second issue, which had, I think, 6 pages. It was like 4 pages with like one sheet in the middle. So it was like a total of 6 pages. That one had a picture of KRS in the corner.
Did you, at the time when you're forming this, was there a kind of a mission statement or a mantra? Like, were you guys, like, what was your, besides just promoting the radio station, was there a desire to see like critical think pieces written or?
So in good question. So in the beginning, I think we saw ourselves as more of a trade magazine. Like that was the initial,
like a billboard.
Yeah, like the initial incarnation of the source. The first tagline was "the voice of the rap music industry." That's how we first framed it. So for the first year or two, I mean maybe year and a half, the first like even 10 issues or so, or 8 issues. There was, and we weren't every month. I mean, we were doing it as we were totally just running it on our own. We had no education in this. We never took a class on journalism. We never took a class on how to run a business, any of that stuff. We just felt it out and did it all, trial and error, basically. But pretty soon, initially we were positioning ourselves as the voice of the rap music industry. Now, I remember. Now, a year later, the summer of '89, I was back in New York City in the same apartment, which was with Will B, and it was right by NYU. And I got a call, and it was now it's '89, so everyone knows who Harry Allen is because I'm going to my media assassin and that voice. Don't believe the hype, that. Right. And so I picked up my phone, and there's a voicemail from Harry Allen, and he was like, I'm calling for Jonathan Shecter. He's like, I see you're calling yourself the voice of the rap music industry. He's like, don't you know there are many voices of the rap music industry? I'm a voice of the rap music industry. Chuck D is a voice of the rap music industry. And it wasn't necessarily a bad call, but it was kind of a challenging
It was a
kind of
very
call.
Harry Allen phone call.
A heavy Harry Allen type phone call, but he was calling. So it wasn't like necessarily bad. So I called him back and I engaged him in conversation, and we made plans for him to write something pretty early on. But yeah, that got me thinking a little bit about who we were and what we were doing. And then following that, I'm kind of compressing a lot of, there's a lot of things in between, but basically at some point, I think in 89, we changed our tag to the Magazine of Hip Hop Music, Culture, and Politics. And that was when we made the decision to be a consumer-facing magazine and not an industry-facing magazine. Now, granted, we were still very small and we were doing it all ourselves. I mean, when I say ourselves, I mean, literally, Dave and I were like all hours of the night, doing every single thing that you see in the magazine. I mean, we were laying out the magazine on the very first version of an Apple Macintosh, the very, very first, the rectangle,
Taking hours to
exactly. Like we were using Quark Express and PageMaker, which were the very first desktop publishing software.
Yeah.
And like it would be like, yes, like you would take like, okay, we want to put a picture there. Oh, wait, no, move it to the right. So you move it to the right, and then you have to wait for the entire page to rebuild itself. It would take like an hour to do one thing. I mean, it was so slow because it was literally, and also you had to, it was those hard floppies. So you had to keep like insert disc A, insert disc B, insert disc, you know what I mean? It was like this incredibly time consuming, slow process, but we were doing it. And, we would get on our hands and knees and sort the magazine. By the time we were mailing out now, at this point, we had a larger mailing list. And we would get on our hands and knees and sort the magazine by zip code, put them in a rubber band and put a sticker with the zip code on that pile of magazines. So it was like literally every little thing that you had to do, we were doing it ourselves.
I mean, how were you able to, in terms of getting content? Like, did you know all the publicists at Def Jam or Jive or whoever was hip hop friendly at the time? Did you, like, how are you able to get FaceTime with them and sort of convince them that, in addition to your black beats and your ride-ons, that we should also be a priority stop?
Yeah, we got pretty early on. I think we were well received by the industry people, like publicists and marketing people and stuff like that. I think, there was never any, I mean, once in a while we would have to pursue somebody, but for the most part, once we established ourselves with the first maybe 5 or 6 issues, like people wanted to send us records. So we started receiving all the records, all the press kits. And then the harder part was getting, interviews, getting the artists. But yeah, that was just basically doing, in pre-internet days, I was all working the phones, getting people, setting up interviews, which were also frequently conducted over the phone. And then starting to meet more writers, and that kind of thing. And then I should mention, very early on, or relatively early on, around 89, 90, we met 2 other Harvard students. One of them is James Bernard, who was actually a Harvard law student. And the other one was Ed Young, who was an undergraduate, but he was a year older than us. And Ed had experience working in the magazine industry. He had taken a year off and worked for the New Republic, which is like a political sort of magazine. And James was a Harvard law student who was actually in Harvard Law at the same time as Barack Obama. And James was more on the editorial side. So he was, a San Francisco kind of black activist type of person who had a lot of political views. And he was into the music too, but, that was kind of my area of expertise. And James kind of took on the socio-political side of the magazine very early. And we kind of like teamed up. So now we had 4 of us. So now instead of 2 of us, there's 4 of us. and we're still basically doing everything ourselves throughout junior and senior year of college.
What was the first glossy non
Mhm.
Newsletter.
newsletter issue? What was LL that first issue?
I believe there was a picture of LL with all the girls, right? Surrounded by girls.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like from a video shoot. There's a picture of LL. It's kind of a shitty, blurry picture, but yeah, that was I think our first color cover. I believe that was our first full color glossy like magazine, basically. Yeah, I think you're right about that.
At what point do you realize that you've instantly caught lightning in a bottle in terms of, this is the internet for a lot of us. Like, I never saw people harshly have critical opinions on hip hop records and that sort of thing. Like, at what point did you realize this was lightning in a bottle for you?
I think throughout our college, the second 2 years of college for us, which would have been, 89, 90, was when it began to be clear that we had something that was legitimately like, a product that people would love. And now I should say, like, for me, my influence, there was two very famous newsstands in Harvard Square, really, really famous, like huge newsstands that sold like every magazine from the whole world. And I would go there every week and I would read New Music Express, NME, Melody Maker, two British magazines. I would look at Spin, I would look at Rolling Stone, and I would look at the Village Voice. So those are like my five anchors. All of them to varying degrees, not Rolling Stone, but Spin with John Leland was dabbling in hip hop. The Village Voice was kind of the main voice of hip hop journalism. You had Nelson George, who started with Billboard, obviously. You had Harry Allen. You had, who am I forgetting? There's so many great writers from that era. Greg Tate. Yes, right. Exactly. So these guys, were who came before me, they were my inspiration. But really, it was Rolling Stone that I was looking at, not because I loved what they were covering. Although, like I said, I did love rock music too, but it was more so because they were the authority. They were the best put together publication. Everyone knows who's on the cover of Rolling Stone. Right. So I would study Rolling Stone more so from a structural point of view to try to like pick up whatever ideas I could. I would read the other ones more for a content point of view to try to get references and records. And NME in particular was great because Tim Westwood, who later became a good friend of mine, would have a chart every week that was so far ahead of America. It was crazy. Like he would get records, put them on a chart, and he would list 10 records that no one in New York or Philly or Boston had ever even heard yet. So he was so far ahead of the curve. So that was a great influence on kind of all those things were influences for me. But then once we started, putting some of those things into practice with some of these early issues of The Source, we'd get a little bit better. We'd add more pages. We'd add more color. There was one very important record issue where we put Malcolm X on the cover, right in the midst of when he was like a major figure in hip hop culture, through Public Enemy and all the other artists talking about him. So we were doing things like that to try to, we wanted to get attention, but we also felt that was reflecting what was happening in the culture.
The Ice Cube issue 10 issue of The Source.
Yeah. With the brick wall.
Is where I believe The Source, the myth of The Source, the legend of The Source, the idea of The Source, and The Source as we know it, all five of those variations. I think that's when it came alive. So how did you have to know that at the rate where you're giving the album's ratings, that was going to spark something in the industry. Did you, first of all, because all the time when I ask journalists, and they all say the same thing, hey, I just review the record and then the editor decides what the ratings are. How are you guys, like for that summer issue? All right, for those that don't know, I think issue 10 was Ice Cube on the cover. This is like late spring of 1990, and they're pretty much going to review every album that will come out in the summer of 1990.
Yes.
And the opinions are, again, before the source, you just got blurbs and mention. You really didn't get much on like quality. So it's not like if Right On Magazine is talking about Michael Jackson's Off the Wall record, they're going to offer anything really critical to how important this is. It'll just be like, hey, as a new album, it's a single, Don't Stop the and Rock With You. No, he's going on tour with his brothers. Like, you just basically got like bullet point facts. You never got opinions. And this is the first time that we're seeing opinions. Probably one of the most craziest moments. So that's the issue. First of all, we learned what 5 mics were.
Yeah.
And that's the issue where I believe, and I'm going off memory, this is how devoted I was. I know that Edutainment by BDP got 5. I know that America's Most Wanted, Ice Cube got 5.
Deservedly so. Yes.
I know that Eric B. and Rakim's Let the Rhythm Hit Him got 5. And Edutainment, I said Edutainment, right?
Yes.
Edutainment, America's people, Tribe, People's Instinctive Travels in the Paths of Rhythm. The moment, it's weird enough because even with those 4 records, I could see Rakim and BDP like, okay, they've released another classic record. I see. I didn't know much about Tribe, and I was happy because I was like, anyone under that De La Soul umbrella, I'm happy to see that there's more zaniness coming from that corner of the world. And of course, yeah, I instantly knew that the Cube thing was classic because that was like I had it. However, the most shocking review of that whole issue, where you guys, I think, went through maybe 20 records, I don't know. You guys gave Fear of a Black Planet a very simple 3.5 stars, which by that point, every critic was just gaga over anything Public Enemy did. And I never thought I'd see the day where someone would offer, well, wait a minute, let's reconsider that, and gave like actual things that stick with me to this day. And I hate that. It's not that I hate that, but I'm very much influenced until maybe, the last 10 years. I was very much influenced by what a reputable critic would say about an album. And when I saw that, I was like, yo, they're trying to make a statement here. Like, it's not burning a bridge. Like 3.5 is not bad, but it wasn't.
Yeah, that 3.5 was.
It wasn't the high praise that America's Most Wanted got, or that sort of thing. And like, but you guys were just fearless.
Which do you think was a better album in retrospect? Fear of a Black Planet or America's Most Wanted?
Oh, dog, come on, stop playing. The first 3 songs on America. Here's the funny thing. So now that I know soup to nuts on how that album got made,
yes,
I do know that the true all-star lineup of the Bond Squad, meaning both Shockleys, Sadler and Chuck, really had their hands in the first 3 songs. And then, even though they got the entire record, I can tell where like Cube had more input.
Yeah.
Versus, this is a straight up Bomb Squad song. So it's almost like I really consider America's Most Wanted the first three songs. Even though that entire album is mind blowing, for me, it's almost like I consider the first 3 songs almost its own world. And then when you get to Once Upon the Projects to the rest, I consider that like another album. But
I could see that. Yeah.
You're absolute. I mean, you're right. I think had we not received Terror Dome and Fight the Power previously, then we could see it as, yes, just as equal to Nation of Millions, but you guys kind of taught me that like retrospect soundtrack songs making appearances on an album long after the fact that, that okay, it doesn't count. But I mean, it wasn't snark whatsoever, but it let me know that rating let me know how serious you guys were about music journalism.
Okay.
And but did you guys realize at that point that you are about to enter a very, very slow game of chicken with the industry in terms of like now there's expectations of what my mic should be. There should be,
You
like
set a standard.
Yeah,
set
there
a
was.
standard that we never had before.
Right.
Okay, so I first of all, thanks for the compliments. I understand and agree with what you're saying in that we were the first publication really to be critical of rap, but not in a meaningful way, and coming from a place where we loved rap. We wanted to. It wasn't really that complicated. It was once we came up with the idea for the ratings, and I don't remember exactly what issue that was. That could have been the first issue where that happened. I don't recall.
I think
It was
the LL issue was the first issue with before it was
ratings.
mics. It was like records or broken.
It was like an exploding record, yeah, and then it became
Yeah.
mics, yeah. And around that time, I also met another early source staffer named Reginald C. Dennis. He was a Harlem-based hip hop head who showed up in a three-piece suit when he came for his first interview, and I was wearing like a t-shirt and jeans and a baseball hat, and like in walks like this guy wearing a suit, and we hit it off. And because we bonded over rap music, and we hit it off. And Reggie became kind of our first music editor, and that most of the ratings happened under his like tenure. I mean, I was the editor in chief, and James Bernard was like a important managing editor. Also, I should mention Chris Wilder, my lifelong friend, another Philadelphia guy. He's the guy that kind of really he's the guy that brought me to Rubber Park. He was the guy that introduced me to hip hop culture in a real way. He was part of our staff as well, another editor there. And during that time, that was when, okay, so we moved 1990. It's a great turning point because that was when we basically graduated from college. We moved the business to New York City. I remember literally listening to America's Most Wanted on the drive from Boston to New York. Like that was like the newest album at that moment.
Right.
And we moved into 594 Broadway, which was right at Broadway in Houston in New York City. And without even realizing, we were in the perfect place for the magazine. I mean, the reason we chose that building was because Bill Stephanie and Hank Shockley were actually friends of ours. I had met Bill Stephanie at some point along the way, and they had Soul Records, which was kind of post Public Enemy.
Sounds of Urban Listeners.
Correct. And
they were always good for an acronym.
That's correct. Yes. And and Bill, as you know, is one of the greatest guys of all time.
Right.
And so he brought us in, and he's like, hey, his office was in the same building. So he said, hey, there's room in this building. I know
And where's the location?
594 Broadway in Houston.
The same place where October 94 happened?
All of it happened. Yes. All of it happened at 594 Broadway. Yep. So, so basically, yeah. So that was 1990. So we moved the business there. In the beginning, we had one room, and it was about 9-10 people. And we had like it was like something out of a cartoon. It was like, there was like one room with like 6 phones and 9 people. And the cords would be crossed in the middle of the room, and there was nowhere to hide. It was like everyone was hearing everything, and it was just kind of like a chaos. And then after a few months of that, we upgraded to like a little bit of a bigger space with like several rooms. And then at some point we divided it in sort of like business and editorial.
I was going to say one of your star players, friend of the show, Dream Hampton,
of course,
has recently created possibly one of the most mind-blowing blowingest documentaries I've seen as of late. entitled "It Was All a Dream," where I mean, essentially, her years as a NYU student, she basically just always kept a camera handy, no matter where she was, and she has all of these magic moments. And there's a moment where she is in the office of what I assume the storied Mind Squad or whoever,
Yes.
the source starting 10, and literally like just to peep in that world for it's all of 14, 15 seconds, but
I
I
was
I always wondered what that environment was like.
I had the same reaction. I saw Dream was kind enough to show me a screening of the film. Yeah, it was, I had never seen that footage. That was my first time seeing that footage. It was like, I think it was around 92, 93 ish.
Yeah.
And she's in the office with a camera. I remember that she was around with a camera, but I had never seen the footage until very recently. But it is a great film. I definitely highly recommend that people watch it.
Once word gets around, how do you guys know who is reputable in terms of like their writing skills or their knowledge of the music?
So, some people already had a name because they had written for other places, and that would be, the names I mentioned, like Nelson George, Harry Allen. Then there were people that came up organically because either they were friends of a friend or they literally just showed up at our office one day. I don't recall. Bones Malone
Bones
is an
Malone,
example of that.
right.
Bones
Classic.
Malone is an example of someone who showed up, but he had already had some bylines in, I think in Spin or possibly other places. He had a very distinctive writing style. Bones wrote, with his own language, basically, if you remember.
Yeah, I do.
Dream, I don't recall how Dream showed up, but she did show up at some point. I don't remember how she entered our world, but there she was, this brilliant woman. And we needed women voices, to be honest. And we were pretty much a very male heavy operation.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew in my heart that we needed more women. And so I immediately assigned her first writing for us, which was to review HWA, Hose with Attitude.
I remember.
Yeah. And so
One and a half mics.
She gave it like one mic or something,
One and
right?
a half mics,
yes,
right.
exactly. But that was necessary. That was a necessary step because we had to put it in. We put it in perspective, and Dream. Who could be a better person than Dream to do that? We were lucky that she came along because she, one of a kind voice. And then along the way, we're talking about those days. I need to mention Maddie C, who is, was my very close friend prior to even the very earliest days of The Source. Matt actually coincidentally knew both me and Dave Mays just by chance. And then when The Source was starting, he, in a lot of ways, as I think back on it, represented really the core of the Mind Squad taste in music. Maddie C was the essence of like our taste in music because him and I were very often aligned in our taste, but not always. But Maddie C was so far ahead of the curve in understanding hip hop and having good taste.
Who had the most influence in term, like what are the sides of the tug of war rope in terms of like who's more esoteric, who's more 3 feet high and rising, and who's more life is too short? Like, and how do you know how to be objectionable?
That's a great question. I mean, one of the earliest challenges we had was dealing with regionalism. We referred to it earlier when you had your experience. There were so many examples. The only
I was going to say the Too Short reviews are probably a good example of albums that are now deemed classic now.
Yes.
That
we made it trash. Yeah.
Through our lens. Yeah. So how does that work?
We were always accused of being New York centric because quite frankly, we were. I mean, I was from Philly, but we were East Coast centric people in terms of our taste in music. But very early on, if you look at when we were still the voice of the rap music industry, we actually were running columns from Houston, Los Angeles, San Francisco,
Yeah, Davey
Atlanta,
D had his thing in San
Chicago.
Francisco.
Yeah,
Right.
we were Seattle. I mean, we were one of the first media entities to recognize that there was hip hop in other parts of the United States besides New York and LA. And another one that was doing it was Yo MTV Raps. So even way after I had left Yo MTV Raps and now I'm doing the source full time, we were kind of the only national hip hop media, platforms that existed. But there was an ongoing tension that existed between East and West Coast, different tastes. Too Short is a great example. Here's another example: NWA, who I love from the first second. I mean, the first Eazy-E record. Everything Dre did, I was like the biggest Dr. Dre fan ever. But in a weird way, we were playing a lot of that on our radio show. We were playing, all the Dr. Dre stuff. I went back to Philly, I remember in, it must have been like 89. And I walk into, I know Nation of Million, Straight Outta Compton came out in 88. So sometime late 88, early 89, I think it was actually Christmas break of late 88, early 89. I was back in Philly and I walked into either it was Sounds of Market or Funko Mart. And Todd One, remember him? He was
I remember Todd One, yes.
Yes, he was a very famous, or not famous, but like a well-known Philly DJ and record guy, basically. And I walk in and I'm like, I was now the source had some momentum and now I had my own radio show. So I was kind of feeling myself a little bit. I walk in and I'm like, hey man, I don't see NWA anywhere. Where's NWA? And he goes, NWA, man, that shit is garbage. I'm like, what? I'm like, yo, people love that. He's like, no one in Philly likes that shit. Nobody likes that shit. That shit is straight garbage. And I'm like, okay, damn, I was shocked.
Right.
Meanwhile, it took like a whole year later and every single car is playing Straight Outta Compton, but it was like the bubble was so strong still around New York and LA and Philly that like it took a whole year extra for like that to get penetrated by something as great as the NWA album,
The ads in Billboard. I used to religiously read Billboard from like 86 to maybe 93, but whenever the any Ruthless ad would be in Billboard magazine, I would just dismiss it because I was like, yo, they got 8-ball jackets and Jerry curls. They look like my cousins in LA. This has to be whack. I'm thinking that I don't want to get caught up in the Toddy T versus Dougie Fresh.
Yes.
Right, that sort of thing. And it wasn't until Tariq, like for some reason, Tariq's number one rule was like he rejected no hip hop. He was never biased against anything. So the fact that Hammer's rhyming over the Apache break and turned this mother out, the fact that like Tariq was like, I assure you, this is like Public Enemy level production. Like you'll love this. Just give it a chance. And finally, during lunch break, he played the first 3 songs of Straight Outta Compton. I was just like, what the hell is this? Like literally in lunchroom. So
yes,
yeah,
that
it was word of mouth for a lot of us.
It took a long time for Philly and New York. So, but we had to be ahead of the curve on this. So kind of to answer your question, we had, the natural tastes of the people and I also want to mention Rob Tulo was another important figure in the source.
Shout out to Reef, yes.
Shout out to Reef. Chimo Du, rest in peace. Incredible photographer. We can talk about him as well. Took so many iconic hip hop photos, including Tupac and Biggie and Nas and all these incredible legends the pictures that we all know to be the representative pictures of these artists is Chimo Du. So we were, we just organically kind of attracted writers, photographers, and artists and producers and DJs and executives. And, even Reggie Osei came into the office and rest in peace. He was also an early writer for us. he was a very, headstrong, smart guy who had a lot to say. Cheo Coker, who's gone on to become, successful screenwriter in Hollywood. A number of people like that
Yeah.
have gone through us. So
I'm
yeah,
working
there
with
was
Che right now. Shout out to Che.
nice. So yeah, so anyway, there's we as far as like to your question about like inside the magazine, who liked sort of De La versus Too Short or stuff like that. I mean, it's hard to say exactly. I mean, I think Maddie and myself and Reef kind of took on the more New York centric stuff.
Mhm.
And then Reggie and James kind of took on the more down south and West Coast stuff. That was sort of the general breakdown, but like, the records that, I mean, our ground zero for Maddie and myself would be like the Brand Nubian album 1990, like,
Let's talk about it.
yeah, that was
That
our ground
was
zero. Yeah.
that to me, that review. Yes, I heard it. I heard of Brand Nubian. Um, I believe I saw a Feel So Good video on Yo MTV Raps maybe once or
Yeah.
twice. But the review, it's almost to the point where, and I also said this about Illmatic. I wondered if the review of the album winds up being like its own headliner. Like, is the reception of the source's perspective of an album bigger than the album itself? Because when I saw those 5 mics for All for One,
Mm-hmm.
and I read the first line, it said Brand Nubian is New York.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that it was positioned, I accepted it because I was like, oh, okay, so this album is a paradigm shift. This album is now how the next generation of New Yorkers are going to look, talk, and they broke down the language and the slang and the skins and all that stuff. And, I didn't know too much about, the 5% Nation and none of that, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and because I was told it was a classic, I just accepted it that it's you know what I mean? Like, that's how impressionable a 17-year-old receiving the information. Did you guys know at the time that was going to be? I think of all the reviews, the Brand Nubian getting 5 mics was the thing where suddenly I started to hear like of the whole regionalism thing, and they don't respect our music and that sort of thing, or not they don't respect our music, but like suddenly it matters what you guys think as opposed to, because I don't know if the lore of Brand Nubian would have kicked off if it were just all right, they got a 4. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, Brand Nubian. I mean, if you were around New York City in that year, I mean, that album leaked. That was that was an example of bootlegging. In those days when cassettes were bootlegged. But
so how
that
far in
album,
advance was it?
we had that cassette so far. I mean, the only one I think rivals it is Nas, and we can tell that story also. But basically, Brand Nubian was red hot in New York. I remember literally when Dante walked into a new music seminar party and they performed. Oh, actually, I think they performed "Wake Up" or one of their early singles. And I'm like, what is this? Because it had that funky groove on it. It had that
Mhm.
Parliament, I think, sample. But anyway, it was there was that record was so big in New York City during that 1990 period. Like every nightclub, or, if you go to like, especially I would hang out a lot in the downtown New York club scene, listening to people like Stretch Armstrong and many others. And
Mhm.
those songs, I mean, you would hear like 3-4 album cuts a night, in one session from Brand Nubian. That was so
So long before,
influential.
so long before its release, you
Yes.
guys had it for at least 5 to 6 months ahead of
Something
time.
like that. Something like that. Yes, I remember
Okay.
Maddie was the keeper of that cassette, and the only other, not the only, but we frequently got records, because back then for those pre-internet days, we would get a cassette, and we would, because we had such a long lead time. I mean, we might be working. If it's August now, the issue we're working on might not come out until like October 1st or something. It was like so far ahead that we had to be always thinking in that frame. So we have to be thinking like, what are people going to like? Whoever we put on the cover has to be who's hot like 2 to 3 months from now, basically. So because the reason was we had to finish all the work, send the issue off to get printed. It took a couple of weeks to get printed. Then it had to get distributed to all the distributors, and it was like a 2-month lead time before it actually ended up on the newsstand, at least. So because of that, we had always that challenge, and the publicists knew that, so they would give us the cassettes, but that's when things would leak. So there was a big period, in the early 90s when a lot of big albums, namely Brand Nubian and Illmatic in particular, got leaked real crazy. I didn't leak either of them, but I did hear both of them very early on. Should I tell the Illmatic story or?
Tell the Illmatic story, yeah.
Good segue.
Okay.
You set yourself up.
Thank you. I don't want it to be boring. Hey, I'm trying to keep it interesting.
No, this is nerd paradise right now. You don't even know. Like, the listenership of this show are a billion of us.
Okay, so what happened was we had halftime and Live at the Barbecue. Okay, Nas's first 2 appearances. Live at the Barbecue, everyone knows the main source. I should mention also, because you brought up something about the ratings, and I think it's important to note that
those 4.5 mics.
The ratings were the number one thing that people spoke. There was 2 things that people cared about: who's on the cover and what rating did they get. Those are the things that we heard the most feedback on. That was what every just general person on the street cared about. The other thing they cared about is like seeing what the rappers were like in real life, like, like what cars they drive and things like that. So there was layers to it, but basically, so we actually gave, if I take one more step back, there was a brief period of time when we were reviewing singles as well as albums, giving ratings to singles. We always reviewed singles, but for a short period of time, we actually gave the mic ratings to singles. Looking Out the Front Door got 5 mics, as it should. It's a hip hop classic, no doubt, right? I love Large Professor. I love Main Source. I think a lot of us love that record. That was the only time in the history of the Source that anyone ever thanked us for a review. We did hundreds and hundreds of reviews. One time only, the Sir Scratch and K-Cut's mother showed up at the Source office. They were Canadian, remember? They're from Toronto. I think they're from Toronto.
Canadians.
They're so polite, right? Those Canadians, right?
They're
so nice.
Yeah. Hey.
They're so nice. And they showed, and this was literally all we ever got was negative feedback from people that were mad.
Right.
One time I can ever recall, somebody was like, "Thank you so much. That review meant so much to us. And she gave me a bottle of like Canadian whiskey or something. And I kept it like on my desk for years. But that was the only time that anyone ever thanked us for a review. The feedback was only either nothing, silence, or negative. The only positive feedback we ever got was from Main Source's Sir Scratch and K-Cut. They were brothers. Their mother. Wow. Yeah.
Shout out to Manners.
That's right. That's right.
Totally.
Being polite goes a long way. No, I appreciated it that she did that. It was very nice of her. But
before you tell the story, and I'm glad you mentioned Main Source, let me ask your opinion. It was actually that Main Source issue that was my not North Star, but I believed that getting a 4.5, getting 4.5 mics in the Source was better than getting 5 mics in the Source.
Why?
Because I mean, this is, everyone has their whole golden era thing. You say yours is 84 to 94. The period in which we would have critical thinking Friday discussions of an album, like religiously, like, and I miss that so much about hip hop now. was definitely between like 88 and kind of 90. Maybe we stopped in 96, 97. Because then it became like, well, they said this was classic, and we don't think this is classic. Like we became like Waldorf and Statler in the Muppets, like
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
balcony.
Thumbs
But
down. Yeah.
right. But I will say that for me, I was like, okay, when something gets 5 mics, because someone in my crew didn't get why De La Soul is Dead got a perfect 5. And I was like, dog, this is the best sequence records, the samples I never heard before, the rhyme stuff, like everything about this album is pitch perfect. And they were like, yeah, but and he said, I'm a little biased because they, in his mind, it was like they're just always giving out 5s. And I'm like, no, it's quite the opposite. Like, I think the source is really hard to please, and this is an example of it. But that stuck with me. And I realized that people don't criticize you as much if you have a 4.5. It's almost like 4.5 is the same effect as a 5, but it doesn't make you that threatening where you got to be like, man, fuck da 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 da. Or I don't know. That's my theory. I always thought 4.5 was better than a 5. And so
there was a lot of the way the reviews, the way the ratings worked as we got more mature now, if we're moving into like the early 90s, is that Reggie became the music editor, as I mentioned, and we would assign out the reviews to people. Sometimes I would write a couple, but for the most part, that was kind of, the reviews were kind of a place for the newer writers for the most part. It was kind of like a way for someone to break into the source.
really,
Yeah. No,
you
yeah.
would trust you would
Well,
trust
I
a
mean,
newbie to that instead of like
for like a Spice One
well-tested.
album or something. I mean, not for like the big marquee names, but for
Right.
it's like a new artist, like somebody new, we would give it to like somebody new because that was a chance for them to kind of prove themselves, but the rating, okay, so there was like a separate thing. The review would get written, but we would have a separate meeting every month with all the main people there, the people I mentioned, and we would discuss the ratings. And that was when
Would you thoroughly review it? Like thoroughly listen to it, or just like
you would defer to the person kind of who had, if I hadn't personally listened to the whole album, I would try to be, cognizant of that and not just give opinions on what I knew, but there were only a handful of times that I like forced the issue and like put my foot down and like, we got to give this a 5. Illmatic was one of those only times.
Okay, so yeah, all right. So Illmatic, you thought it was classic material. Who was like, it might be a 4, or
Reggie was like, it's not. We don't know if it's going to be a class. I mean, it was easy to say. Listen, 5 was called a hip hop classic, so it was easy to say in the course of this meeting, which we had every month, where we would discuss the ratings. Is that really a hip hop classic? Is this going to be remembered 20 years from now as like a very important? And it was a hard question. You're like, here we are, ahead of even it coming out. We're like months ahead of it we're like among like maybe a dozen people that have even heard this record. And now we have to decide, is it going to be a hip hop classic? It's kind of hard, it's like, it's not easy. In the case of Illmatic, okay, so what happened was we had heard Halftime. We loved it. Loved it. That movie Zebrahead, remember? I think that came up on another one of your episodes I saw.
Yeah, with Clark Kent.
Right, that's correct. Right, with Clark Kent.
I worked at Rough House, and we had the premiere of Zebrahead, and Clark Kent starts spinning In Vogue's Hold On, and Nas gets up and freestyle, and I think maybe I was like the 6th in line. So that's my.
Oh, that's right. You were that's when you rapped. I remember. Yes, that's right. Okay. Okay, cool. So we loved Halftime and Live with the Barbecue. This kid Nas, incredible. He was shocking. I'm waving automatic guns and nuns, and hell for snuffing Jesus and all that stuff. So it was shocking. It was like shocking rap, but it was obviously really good, and it was really literate, and it sounded great, and we were very, very hungry to hear more from this kid Nas. So I had a trip booked to Philly And on the agenda was to visit Chris Schwartz and to go to Rough House Records.
Mm-hmm.
So it was late 90. It was after Zebrahead. It was probably late 92.
Mm-hmm.
I go to Philly and I sat in that Rough House when Rough House was in the suburbs. It was like he had this office it was no longer in the city. It was in the suburbs somewhere, I remember. And Chris Schwartz was at the desk, and we talked about a few different things. And then, Rough House had some great records. They had some great stuff. So, but my real agenda for being there was I wanted to hear more Nas. I didn't tell him that, but that was my true agenda for going there. So I go there, and Chris Schwartz, as you recall, had kind of like the air of like a messy person, sort of like his hair was kind of messy. His
Uncut Gems, the original version.
Yeah, exactly. It was a very hectic, noisy, just sort of like disheveled atmosphere, right? And so there was like a desk with like coffee cups and piles of tapes and records and all that. And so I go in, and I'm like, hey man, so we talked about other stuff. And then I'm like, so listen, about this guy Nas, he's like, Nas, you know who that is? And I was like, yeah, of course we know who that is. Halftime, Live at the Barbecue. He's like, oh man, I mean, I'm surprised you guys know about him. And I'm like, oh, we love him. We love Nas. We're really curious to hear more stuff. And he searches through his desk, moves some stuff around. He picks up a cassette and he hands it to me. He said, you can check this out. I was like, I can keep it? He's like, yeah, you can keep it. Put it in my pocket. I leave the meeting. I go back to 30th Street Station. I get back on the train, the Amtrak back to New York City. I take out my Walkman. Still using Walkman back then. Pop in the Walkman, hit play. And what I have in my hands, in my Walkman, is the entire Illmatic album, like 6-7 months before it came out. Okay. It was like so long in advance. It was the first draft of it. There was like multiple mixes were different. I still have this cassette, by the way. It's sitting in my office right now. Yeah. Wow. I have it here right now. So basically, I'm sitting here on this Amtrak train, listening to Represent, One Love, all these like unbelievable songs. And by the time I get to New York, I am like floating in the air with the realization that I have like the holy grail in my pocket. I have maybe like the greatest album I've ever heard in my life, like sitting and it's like this feeling of,
and no one knows
about it. No one's heard it. It was like literally like, I don't know why. To this day, I have no idea why Chris Schwartz, I mean, obviously he wants to promote his music, but it was way too early to give that cassette to the Source. It was
they didn't know what they had, which is why I went back to Columbia and not on, because we had Nas on Rough House for the longest, and then suddenly it was like shrug. Columbia took him back.
That's right. And Faith Newman and so forth. Right. And so that's what happened. I think he just didn't realize that he had this, legendary, groundbreaking, earth-shattering record here. So I get back to New York. It's like 10, 11 o'clock at night. I go back to the Source office downtown. I knew that some people were going to be there. I walk in, it's Matty C, Reef, Chris Wilder, Scott Free, later on Loud Records A&R was there, I remember. And I walk in and we had like a mediocre, like, system, like, some kind of like off the shelf stereo system. I hit play and I play the entire album for this assembled heads, the Mind Squad. And literally every single person is just like, like I remember Scott Free was literally laying on the floor. Like he was so blown away. Like when people like fall down out of like mock, shock, like he was just, the entire room was just, this is insane. This is so good. Especially.
Can I ask something though?
Yeah.
Because the thing was, when I had those moments, they were chaotic bomb squad moments.
Yeah.
I never had that moment with a regular meat and potatoes, perfect beat,
like a boom
perfect
bap
loop,
type.
perfect rhyme. Just nothing. There's nothing there's no novelty to it. It's not like, oh yeah, it was a classic because they're using childhood records or they're using
Right.
95 trillion samples. Like I'd never heard just a perfect beat, rhyme, perfection record. And so it took me, because it didn't come with bells and whistles, the same bells and whistles that 3 Feet High and Rising was, or Nation of Millions was, or America's Most Wanted was. He wasn't hyper gangster. He was like, it's for me, it was like such a risk. Because when I heard it again, it was that Gangstar issue. I read the review first, and then I was like, I got it. And I was like, well, it's so normal. It's only 10 songs. Like rap records back then were like 27 songs. I was like, there's no skits. There's no. And my manager finally brought me down to earth. He's like, yo, man, this is what Intervisions, but Stevie Wonder was. Like, it was just 9 perfect songs. Like, this is 9 perfect songs. And I actually had to grapple with that. Like, I wasn't in touch with how I felt. I still had to follow what you guys said. And I had so many questions about a non-bells and whistles record getting that much acclaim to it. But you guys instantly felt you got goosebumps from the gate.
He knew.
Yeah. I mean, I remember I loved every song. I liked every single song, especially One Love. That was the one that pushed me over the top. Like, it's just so deep, it just sounds so, and his lyrics are so good on it. It's just, so that was like something like, 6 or 8 months before the album ended up coming out. So we have this holy grail now sitting in our possession. What do we do with it? And I think you're right. It was that issue with Gangstar on the cover.
Yep.
And I went and I took on the job of, because I had this experience, I went and took on the job of writing the feature about Nas, introducing Nas to the world. It was called The Second Coming. Mm-hmm. And it was a reference to obviously Rakim, because that was, the God MC. That's who everyone viewed as pretty much the greatest rapper of all time, almost universally. And Nas was viewed as, the next in line for that kind of a title, just by us. I mean, I don't know. The world didn't know yet, but that was how we were looking at it. And we went, and then Matty C went and interviewed all the producers that were involved, Pete Rock, Premier, Q-Tip, and Large Professor. And so it was like this dream team. So we put together the story, and then we still had to do the review part of it. So we assigned it in one of these cases, again,
to Minya,
to a newer writer, and her name was Minya O.
Yeah.
Later known to the world as Miss Info.
Miss Info, right.
Yes.
But she called herself Shorty.
She called herself Shorty, right? Because she was an incredibly hip, uptown New York chick, who came in and was just new shit, way ahead. I mean, but this was still very early in her evolution, I think. And we assigned her the job. I'm really glad it was her because,
But I was going to say, was it risky for you to not see this through? Like, were you not allowed to touch your own reviews, or would that have been seen as a conflict of interest? Like, well, you can't be the editor-in-chief and.
No, that wasn't really. I mean, like in this case, I think the reasoning was that I had already written. Like, I was obviously the main champion of it inside the building, but like.
But you saw the story. You saw the story, the feature story, more important than his album review.
In my mind, that's more journalistic to me. Is like this feature story is where you tell the whole story, and like that's where. So
no
in
offense,
my mind,
I don't remember that story, but I remember that album
I get it. Yeah, that's okay. I understand. That's the case because listen, as I said earlier, what most people did, just like yourself, is they looked and see, oh, who's on the cover? Okay, it's so and so, and then they'd flip right to the back and say, what rating did everything get? Like that was the normal way people consume the source. Absolutely, I get it.
Why didn't you put the record reviews in the front of the magazine then?
You know what? Again, I think it was earlier. Like I said, I was following that Rolling Stones like structure, and they had the reviews in the back. So,
by the way, I did read everything, but yes, I did read the thing backwards. So
I know, I get it. It's all good.
yeah.
So basically, like, yeah, so yeah, she did the review, but then again, now this is where we had the big meeting, and I was pounding. This is one case where I used my authority to force the issue, and I was like, Reggie, it's a 5, man.
What did
It's
he
a
want?
5. I think he wanted either a 4 or maybe a 4.5. The others in the room, everyone agreed with. I mean, the majority of people agreed with me. There was a few, maybe I don't remember exactly who didn't. I know Reggie was the main voice of the opposition, and he lost. In this case, he lost the debate, and it got a 5. And I think he would admit that we were correct about giving it a 5. I mean, obviously, it's pretty much the iconic hip hop album, or among the iconic, legendary, all time classic hip hop albums. I think everyone agrees with that.
For me, crafting albums, of course, it was always, does someone see the vision inside my head the same way that I see it, when they review it? And so, the obsessive amount of headaches I gave my publicist, Amy Morris, shout out to Amy Morris, and Ursula Smith, just daily about like, okay, when do we get this to the source? When do we get this to the source? When do we get this to the source? And we're not going to get to that part of the story yet of what happened that day in October of '94. However, it was to the point where I saw it as me getting up at 5 a.m. to get on a train and the thing was, Amy's like, you cannot go to the source of me. Like, that's, there were still rules of like, not crossing the line as an artist and that sort of thing. And literally me going to the source to get the issue, because you guys would not reveal to her what the rating was. She did tell me, like, yes, you guys got the leave review. But for me to get up in another state at 5 a.m, to get on a train, to go to New York, to go outside that building, and for her to hand me that issue, and for me to look and read the review first before I see the mics, and I'm going through each mic, like, okay, 1 mic, 2 mic, 3 mic, 4 mic. Okay, 4 mic. I'll take 4. It was literally of that obsessive level. Like, at what point did you realize that the artists are obsessed with that? Like, I'm certain, was Nas even sort of like, what the source give me, or?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, we knew, like, there was a sense that the ratings were important because you could hear it in the feedback we got, that we knew that the ratings were one of the main things that people looked at. But we spent most of our time on the rest of the magazine. You know what I mean? Like, we were filling the magazine with features and photo shoots, and then we got into fashion and electronics and movies and TV and film and and all that stuff. So in other words, the answer to your question is, we always knew that people were watching and that the artists cared, but we didn't get a lot of feedback. Like, from the artists, it wasn't commonplace for people. I mean, they might have been angry or they might have been happy, and we didn't hear it usually. I mean, of course we would talk to the label people, and I guess maybe you would hear secondhand, oh, Questlove was very happy with the review or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, I might have heard something like that, but like, there wasn't a lot of direct artists interaction. I mean, there was interaction, but just not feedback necessarily.
As a fan, I only have one question.
Go ahead.
And that is, I wish you guys would have reconsidered all of your Gangstar reviews.
Well, listen, let's talk about.
They were straight
Gangstar.
3.5. I mean, eventually, long after you left, of course, they
reevaluated that.
Yeah, there was a reevaluation, and Moment of Truth got its just due with the 4.5 review, but that's long after you guys had left the building. But there's one thing I wanted to ask also, is there's a point where the way that the stories are presented, more importantly, like, would you consider the Hellraiser Tupac issue? Like, if anything, I feel as though the Hellraiser issue really built whom we know as Tupac. Like, before that issue, you might have had a clue of who Tupac was if you watched MTV News, or
Was that after Juice? Was that after Juice or?
Nah, this is Hellraiser's like possibly right before he gets shot in the
Yeah.
so this is like early 94. But it was such
No, that's after Juice.
Subsidiary. Oh, it's way after Juice.
Yeah, after Juice. Okay,
Bishop came to life. So
right, exactly. Okay, so let's talk about Tupac, because I was going to talk about Gangstar, but Tupac, I got some interesting perspective. So, I mean, I didn't really love Tupac as a rapper for a long time. When he came out, I clown around when I roll around with the underground. Like, it wasn't necessarily earth shattering. It was just
we were comparing everyone to Rakim.
Basically, and KRS.
If you're not Rakim or KRS, right, I get it.
KRS, the Mount Rushmore was KRS, Rakim, and Chuck D. And then you could argue for the fourth one being Big Daddy Kane, Cool G Rap, or a number of others, LL, there's other potentials. But anyway, so when Tupac came out with that, I didn't like it. I didn't like him. I didn't like his early albums. I thought that it was okay, but it just didn't really move me. And then I got a visit from Hollywood producers who came into the Source, which is rare. We were still basically broke. I mean, we didn't make any money for most of this time anyway. And we were, and having someone from Hollywood, you feel like, oh, someone important is here.
Wait, time out. You're not making money, like, in terms of like what we see, like the Billboard charts or whatever. How do you know like what you guys are selling in terms of
like magazines, like how many we were doing well, like with the magazine was doing very well on the newsstands. I mean, it was we eventually it got to the point where we were selling hundreds of thousands of magazines every month. But throughout most of my time there wasn't a huge profit. I mean, we were making a small, modest salary. The business was profitable, but it wasn't like making a killing. Granted, this is before anyone knew anything about startups, the internet, VC funding. We had none of that. Although if you want me, I can tell the story when Quincy Jones tried to buy the Source. People may or may not know
before
that. Before Vibe, yes.
What
before
happened?
Vibe. Okay, so in that case, what happened was we got contacted by Russell Simmons, who was friends with Quincy, and he told us that Quincy Jones is interested in talking to us, along with Time Warner, and Quincy was working on a deal with Time Warner. So the four core founders of the Source, myself, Dave Mays, James Bernard, and Ed Young, get on a plane. We go to LA. We go to Quincy Jones's house in Beverly Hills. We're sitting there with that beautiful mansion, and of course, you're starstruck, right away, like, holy shit, we're in Quincy Jones's house. We walk into the room. There is a room of suits. There's about 6, 7 guys, white guys in suits. There's a woman named Jane Pratt, who at that point was an editor working for Time Life. And there was Quincy Jones and Russell Simmons. So there was like 10 people in the room. We walk in, 4 of us, we sit and talk. They're interested in the Source. I remember it was very early. It was in 91 even. Very
Summer
early.
91 before he went to jail. Yes.
That's right. It was 91. So we walk in, we have a whole meeting where we talk about, they start ripping apart, not in a mean-spirited way, but they're kind of like, you guys could do this better. Like, the artwork isn't that great. The photos aren't that great, but we love what you're doing. You guys are doing it great, but we feel like we can help you do it better. And we were open to it. We were so naive. We didn't know shit, but we were just in there having the meeting and thinking maybe we'll all get rich. Who knows what's going to happen. Right. And so we have the whole meeting, and we end up getting a very low ball offer from them. It was like insulting. It was like ridiculously bad. I forget the number, but it was like something like $50,000 for the whole magazine. It was like ridiculous. Yeah,
Right.
it was like pathetic. And they wanted us to come work for them. And I remember in the letter where they sent us the offer, they spelled like several of our name. My name always gets spelled wrong, so I
Hmm.
was used to it, but they spelled like multiple people's names wrong, and it was just very disrespectful. The whole thing. That once we got the letter, we felt very disrespected, so we didn't respond, and we just decided like we're not going to do it. Um, and then they ended up starting Vibe like a few months later, and then there was a brief period of time when the editor of Vibe was a guy named Jonathan Van Meter, and I'm Jonathan Shecter, and so there was two Jonathans. So anyway, that's the story. So that was it. So they wanted to buy the source. They ended up not doing it. But long story short, what ended up happening, we were very concerned. We knew that there was going to be this other magazine. Vibe comes out. It is beautiful. It has Tretch on the cover looking all, incredible, and
Hmm.
the photos, and it was all like very fashion forward, and it was like beautifully designed with amazing photography and all that stuff. And we were concerned, but it ended up being the best thing that ever happened to us. Why? Because suddenly all these legit advertisers are interested in the category. Because
Hmm.
Time Warner had like Pepsi and Ford and Sony and Sony Electronics and like things like that. So we were like getting by on just industry ads basically. But now for the first time, we had this new market of huge companies they're interested in rap music. And,
Hmm.
it didn't take long for them to see that we were actually the leaders in the space, even though Vibe, had a
Or
bigger
was
splash.
glossier. Right.
Yeah, but we were the actual like on the street, newsstand leaders. So it helped us. It ended up helping us. It took a long time for that arc to all kind of play out, but in the end, it was actually a positive for the source that they started Vibe. Um,
Okay. So back to your Tupac thing.
okay, so back to Tupac. So the guys come to my office and they say, "So we're casting for this movie, and we're looking at artists, and we're looking to you. We want to ask you like." Who is, we want to get a sense of like who's who in this rap world. So they started talking about rappers. I don't remember everyone they said, but they said Tupac. And I said, "Oh, you mean that guy from the Digital Underground?" I was like, he's okay. He's not that great. I mean, no one really knows who that is.
Right.
And they were like, "Oh, okay." And like we had the meeting, and then it shows how much I know because they casted him. It was Juice. They were making Juice. They
Hmm.
casted him in Juice. Obviously, he knocked it out of the park. It was like an incredible movie, incredible performance, and it really made him, a star. And I remember I was watching that movie screening with Russell Simmons it was in a private screening, and Russell happened to be there. And I
Hmm.
remember Russell saying, "If they throw this motherfucker off the roof, this movie's going to be a hit." I don't remember. You remember there's a scene where they throw someone off the roof? I
Yeah,
don't.
it was him.
It was
That was his
him.
last scene. Right.
Right, exactly. They say if they throw him off the roof, this movie's going to be a hit, and they threw him off the roof. Russell goes insane. He's right. The movie's a hit. So then a little bit later, I go to the first "How Can I Be Down" event in Miami, which was a very bootleg,
Yeah.
homemade event. It was like at somebody's house.
What were those events like?
It was kind of like what you'd think. It was nice. I mean, look, it was a nice house, but it was very like bootleg. It was like it was like a lot, that particular one. I remember that Tupac was there. Dr. Dre and Ed Lover from Yo MTV Raps were filming an episode there. Puffy was there. A bunch of other artists. And I was there with a photographer. We interviewed a bunch of people. But I remember seeing Tupac, and now I start paying attention to him because now his star is starting to rise.
Hmm.
And he always had like a joint or a cigarette in his hands. He was drinking, but all
Hmm.
the girls were all over him, and like he was like a charisma out the
He
over
was
the
a
top.
star.
He was
Yeah.
a star, right? So I still don't really love his rapping. And I'm still like kind of the jury is still out. I didn't really like his records. I just didn't really think that like Brenda's Got a Baby was kind of boring. I just didn't really love it.
Hmm.
And so then a little bit later, I remember I went to a party in Brooklyn. It was Lord Jamar's birthday party that I was invited to. I remember I walk into this party in Brooklyn. It was in an outdoor courtyard, and there was a lot of people there. There's a lot of beautiful girls there. It was like a nice party. I walk in and I'm having a good time, and I see like a lot of artists around and stuff. And then I noticed this kid in the corner, and I see Tupac is there. I see Tupac is in this party, and this is right when he's hanging out with Biggie. Biggie wasn't there, but it was during the time when he was like, starting to hang out with Biggie in that period of time.
Right.
He's in Brooklyn. So Tupac is there, and I look in the corner of my eye and I see this guy dressed exactly like Tupac. Like literally, he has the bandana wrapped around the bald head. He has his shirt open. He looks exactly, he's modeled after Tupac and Juice like image. Like he has the exact look of Tupac.
Mm-hmm.
And he's eyeing him. I'm like, that's weird. Like, whoa, I kind of see it happen from afar. And this guy has like a fire in his eyes, like he's angry. And he walks across the space up to Tupac and basically challenges him to a battle in this party. A guy that looks exactly like Tupac challenges Tupac to a rhyme battle inside this party. And this is a 100% true story. Right. So I go there and I'm like, well, and so then people start gathering around. Like you could tell there's about to be something happening, right?
Right.
And so the guy starts rapping, and he's not good. He's not great. He's okay, but he's not really good. And I'm like, it's pretty clear pretty early on that he's not really a good rapper, but he's trying. He's like, yo, man, I'm going to fuck you up. I'll do this. I'll do that. And everyone's kind of like, I'm looking around going like, where's like somebody to jump in? Like, where's like one of the Brand Nubian guys, or, where's Buckshot Shorty? Like, we need somebody here to like represent New York. Right. Because I knew Pac was more of like a California, even though he's from New York, he's a California guy. Uh-huh. So the guy finishes, and then Pac steps up and destroys him, just gives this like virtuoso performance where he's like breaking down. He's like, you even look like me. You got your bandana like me. You got this like me. And then he looks over and he goes, I'm gonna even murder you in front of my dude from the source. And he like points at me, and it's like this whole moment. And I was like, that was the moment when I realized that he really actually could rap, and that he was like actually like a really good MC. It wasn't until that live, like impromptu thing that I realized that he's a great rapper. And then I kind of changed my take on him. It took that experience for me to really get it, and then of course that years later, he, became a huge, even bigger star.
I mean, at this moment, are you guys even remotely concerned about like, like there was an era of Def Jam where it was just like ye old general store, and then suddenly you go to Def Jam, and then now you got security clearance and all that stuff, and at any point did the source come to that, or?
We had our share of threats and stuff like that. I mean, it never thankfully spilled over into anything major. There was, to your point, I get it. I think that was one of Chimo Du's great skills, because she did that Snoop one. What you're referring to with that Snoop is that she had this ability to walk into any hood in the entire world and people would like him. He was a very warm, friendly dude. I believe he had like Nigerian roots, or he was African, but he had like a very friendly demeanor. There was something about him. He smiled all the time. He was very calm and positive energy. And so that was one of our secrets, I guess, was that we could walk into a situation where other journalists maybe wouldn't want to. I did this myself a few times, but any of the many writers that work for the source who got sent on an assignment to go to Houston or to go to LA. I once went on a graffiti run with KRS, Fat Joe, and the Bronx Tat crew. And I went to like the straight, like the graffiti, like, 4 a.m, like climbing, breaking into the train yard, all that shit. Like we all had those moments when we basically penetrated what a normal like journalist would do. And I think, thank God, like we never had any major problems. Like there was always, I think in a sense, we were, I mean, everyone had an interest in making sure things went well. Like there was the artist at the center of whatever thing we were doing would do everything in their power to make sure that the situation was good. Everyone wants like a good story. Everyone wants the pictures to look good. Everyone wants good reviews, so we kind of like coasted through on that.
Question: whose idea was it to do the crack issue?
Great question. That was, I think, Reggie and James Bernard were the primary drivers behind that one.
Okay.
For those who don't, I think I know you know this, but for trivia buffs, Biggie's 10 Crack Commandments is actually from a source article. There was in that.
I did not know that.
You didn't know that? Oh, okay. If you go back to that crack issue, there was we did a whole
explain
issue.
Like what didn't the actual, was that the cover story, or was, I'm trying my hardest to remember, was it the cover story, or was it a main feature?
I think it was just a big feature. I don't think we put crack on the cover. I think we still put a rapper on the cover, but It was, I think it was the two times that we did very political things that I remember was obviously the LA riots. Mm-hmm. That was a huge monumental source moment because we covered the LA riots very extensively from the point of view of the rioters, really. Mm-hmm. And then the crack issue was another, we devoted a lot of pages to the crack epidemic, but not from oh my God, what's going on, but more so from like what's really going on,
right.
like,
I got it.
And one of the articles was the 10 Crack Commandments. That was literally one of it. Was like a sidebar. It was like, it wasn't the main feature.
Wait,
but
the 10 Crack Commandments was in that crack issue?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yes. And if you go back and Biggie, it's almost word for word. I mean, it's not literally word for word, but it's like 80% word for word. It's like he got that from the source. Yeah.
I did not know that.
Mm-hmm.
I do remember that issue and thought like, whoa, like they're going to places that no periodical has dared go.
Should we touch on Biggie real quick?
Yeah. Hit me.
Because, that's kind of if anything, that's the biggest artist that ever came out of the source. I mean, let's be real, like mm-hmm. as far as being, christened an artist because of something that happened in the Source magazine. We had a column called Unsigned Hype. Everybody knows, that was, the idea was that we would review cassettes from regular people, regular artists who are trying to make it. And every month we would pick one cassette. Matty C, who later on, became A&R for Loud and became a legendary ear, mm-hmm. Was kind of the main point person. And so Matt would we literally had like a plastic trash bag filled with cassettes. I mean, we would get hundreds of cassettes a month. I mean, maybe 200 every month. I mean, it was endless.
Who would go through those?
So one of Matty C's job was to go through all these cassettes. Now, what really ended up happening is maybe the first month he listened to a bunch of them. But as we all know, when it comes to demos, mm-hmm. unfortunately, most of them are not good. So you kind of get burned out very quick. And then he started putting in I remember he added to the text of the description, put your best cut first. I remember you put that in there.
Smart. Because
he didn't want to have to like sit through like,
search for it. Right.
Search for it. So one day, after doing this and the truth was that bag got bigger and bigger and we would get like literally like 5 a day. So it would be like 150 a month. Okay. And it would be like a bag of cassettes. And it was, no one wants to really go through that, but slowly, we would once in a while, that one that's a weird pink cassette. Let me listen to that one. We would just randomly like pick them out. And then one day he comes into my office and he's like, yo, we got one. Listen to this. And he sits down, he hits play, and I hear the original for Ain't No Half Steppin', which is who is it again?
Blind Alley by
Blind Alley. Yeah, Blind Alley.
Emotions.
I hear the Emotions Blind Alley. And what's up, Source? My name is Biggie Smalls, I want to say thank you for giving me this opportunity. Thank you so much. I really respect y'all. I want to thank you. He gave us like a nice intro where he like thanked us for the opportunity to rap for us.
Mhm.
And then the beat kicks in and he starts rapping, and it's amazing. It's phenomenal. It's basically like Biggie, you know, it's like it's all the personality that we all came to know and love. So Maddie had gotten this tape, not from the mail, but from Mr. C.
Mhm.
Mr. C had gotten the tape from 50 Grand, who was Biggie's guy,
Mhm.
who gave the tape to Mr. C, who played the tape for Maddie. Maddie shows it to us. We're like, oh, this is incredible. So we go and we decide he's going to be the unsigned hype. We send Chimo Du to his house. He takes those first pictures of Biggie, where he's like, you know, like on the street. I think he's outside.
Mhm.
And we run it and it comes out. And then this rarely happened, but we got a call from Puffy. Maddie got a call from Puffy. This almost never happened. He's like, yo, I'm interested in that. And this was happening right at the time, obviously. Jodeci, Andre Harrell, and like the whole breakup was happening. It was right at that time when like he was leaving Andre Harrell. So it was right when Bad Boy was starting. It was just timing. And so he's like, yo, I'm interested in this guy. And so Maddie goes and takes the meeting.
Wait, y'all introduce?
Yeah. Maddie C introduced Puffy to Biggie. Yes.
That I did not know.
Yeah. Yeah. And
oh,
so we go to take the meeting, and I didn't go. Maddie went to the meeting, and Biggie's like, yo, Puffy is like, so yeah, like, tell me let me hear the tape. He plays the tape. He's like, yo, it is incredible. And he's like, what does he look like? And Maddie's like trying to describe what Biggie looks like. You know, he's like, well, he's kind of a big dude, you know,
right.
And, you know, and so Biggie and Puffy meet, and very shortly after that, we get Party and Bullshit. Party and Bullshit was like, I don't know, like a month or two, like not long after that, like that record got made. And obviously we're like going insane, loving it. And then, you know, long story short, I got to meet Biggie a couple of times. He came to the office. I remember one particular time we went to the staircase to smoke weed. We smoke a blunt, about 6 people. Biggie's there, and he's at this point, he is still unsure. And this is depicted in all of the documentaries and the movies that have been made. Remember, he still wanted to be a drug dealer. He didn't really want to be a rap star. So right when that moment was happening, that was like real time. I saw, and he didn't say drug dealer, but he's sitting there going, man, I got shit going on. I don't know if I have time for this
Quick
shit.
Money versus.
Yeah. He's like, I don't have time for this shit, man. I'm doing well. Like, I don't really have time for this shit. And like, the rest of us are trying to encourage him, like, yo, man, like, this is a real opportunity. Like, you should really do this. Party and Bullshit was already out. So I thought it was already a done deal. Like, he was going to be huge, but he didn't really see it that way yet.
Right.
And then not long after, I think I've told you this story before. I remember sitting on the step of near Washington Square Park, and that's when I heard the demo from the night before of Juicy. And Maddie hits play, and I hear, you know, Mtume come out of the speakers, and then I hear Biggie, you know, doing these rhymes, and then he says, "Smiles every time my face is up in the source," and I'm like, over the moon, like, this is amazing.
Right.
And that was it. And then, you know, then we got Peace to Mateo and all that other stuff, and
A Star is Born.
A Star is Born.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you the question, man.
Go ahead.
So part 2 of that story I told of me leaving Philly, get on a train at 6 a.m. just to come to the West Village, just so I can be the first person to read what my rating was. You know, the reason
talk about
why
this all the time. You have to say this is very important. I don't know how much you listen to this show. We talk about the roots and the microphones all the time. This is a big moment.
I've heard a little bit. Yeah, I've heard a little bit of it.
And the thing was, you know, I was elated. I was nervous because, you know, we were so left to center and taking a risk on you know, like this new uncharted live instrumentation territory thing. But yeah, we got the lead review. We got 4 mics. I'm happy. I want to go up and say thank you. I would have been the second person to thank you guys for my 4 mics, but I can't do that right now because I don't know that all hell is breaking loose
There's a
inside.
crisis at the exact same moment. There's a crisis happening at the source.
Literally.
Yes.
So
Yes.
the story that I got was that your partner, Dave Mays, took it upon himself to insert a 3.5 page feature on one of his acts from Boston without the knowledge of you guys knowing it. And basically, as I'm discovering my 4 mics in the magazine, you guys are also subsequently discovering, hey, there's an article here about Almighty RSO. And this is when I first heard the term called conflict of interest. You know, first I was like, well, what's wrong with that? People promote all the time and nepotism. And, you know, Amy and Ursula are trying to explain to me, the newbie of the industry, like there's certain rules that you follow and there's conflict of interest and there's, you know, talking to your coworkers and that sort of thing. And of course, I didn't realize that this was a major, like the way that this shit spread like wildfire. Because the thing is like Amy is very connected to every publicist, every you know, and there's no such thing as a phone thread or, you know, social media or whatever. So it's like the second we get back to the Ursula Smith's, it wasn't set to run. Something media. I forget the name of her company.
I remember Ursula. I remember Ursula Smith very well. Absolutely.
Yeah. So when I mean, it was like they were all on like a war council, like, yo, the source is over they're all walking away. What happened that morning in October of '94? How did you find out that you guys have been compromised by one of your own? And the subsequent aftermath of that. I never knew what happened on the inside of those walls that morning. And of course, I get the announcement that night. The source, as I knew it, is no more. I mean,
and also we saw each other around that time. If you remember, I went to the studio and I met with you. But anyway, to answer your question,
yes,
just unrelated. I happened to see you shortly after that happened, but you're right. The way you framed it is exactly correct. We every month would have an editorial, sort of a layout, not just editorial, but the whole sort of map of the whole magazine. Dave and I would primarily just him and I would sit in a room and we'd have, okay, this month's issue, how many ads did he get? How much editorial do we have? And like, where do these things come together? There would be a sort of like a physical sheet of paper that we would map out the whole issue.
So you have to Tetris the format of, okay, I get it.
The whole magazine, right? So it's like we have, okay, here's the cover feature, here's the secondary feature, here's the record reviews, here's the fashion shoot this month, here's this, whatever. So those pages were marked as ads. So I thought they were ads. I didn't even think twice about it. We often had ads that were, sometimes people would buy like a 2-page spread ad. That was like a normal thing. So I just assumed that that's what it was. Mm-hmm. So we go, we finished the issue. As you said, it had Redman on the cover. Mm-hmm. And we, I get a call, I think, from James Bernard, who is, you know, my partner on the editorial side and also a co-owner of the magazine. Mm-hmm. Yo, something really fucked up happened, man. You got to come in right now. You got to see this. I'm like, what? Just come here and see. So I come in and it's the pages that we thought were ads were actually a whole article about this group that Dave had been working with separate from the magazine. He was managing them basically, but you know, I don't know if that was his official title, but that was basically what he was doing. He was getting them deals. He was cultivating them and trying to make them into stars. And they wanted to jump ahead and get in this, and we were approaching it the same way we approached every artist, in that let it unfold. Let's, we got hundreds of artists every month. Like, let's figure this out, whatever. Instead, this thing happened, and it was a very big violation of our ethics inside the magazine, our friendship. I felt very offended by that act, because it was like, taking away. I was the editor in chief. I was in charge of every article. Like, I didn't write every article, but I made sure I knew about every article that was going in. And this was the first time that I didn't.
Everyone has a code. I get and I understand that. To the public out there,
Would they even know the difference? You're saying,
I would have not known the difference at all.
I know. Okay, so here's what really happened. If you want to know the sequence of events, my inclination, to be quite honest with you, was the way I always am, which is to handle this privately. I did not want to go public with this information. My instinct, even though it was really messed up and I was very angry, I would have handled it privately, but something happened that prevented me from doing that. What happened was James Bernard sent out a letter addressed to Dave using a fax machine. We used to have a fax newsletter called the Weekly Word, and it was pre-internet. And what it was we had the fax number of literally everyone in the rap industry, radio, records, et cetera. So we would send out this a weekly, and Miss Info, her first job for us as far as a full-time job was that newsletter. She would actually come in once a week and she would say, what are the biggest stories? And we talk, and then she'd go and type up that one-page sort of like summary. It was kind of like a news headlines thing. Like, this is what's happening, so that people on rap shows would be like, this is from the source. We found out that so-and-so is happening. So we had this platform that was still very, kind of like a really industry-oriented thing, but
what the source initially was.
It was still along the lines of initial, and we even had at one point when we tried to do an industry magazine separate from the source, very quick, very briefly. But anyway, so we had this platform. So this crisis happens. Dave does this thing. I'm very angry. Everyone's angry. At this point, we had a pretty big staff. Our editorial side was probably about 10 or 12 people. And the business side was probably another 10 or 12 people. We probably had 25 people working there at this time. And so James does something that I thought was a bad idea. I still think it was a bad idea. He goes and he writes this letter to Dave, and he puts it through that Weekly Word fax machine, so that in 1 minute, the entire rap industry knows, Dave, how could you do this? Like, you put this article about these guys. We had nothing to do with it. We knew nothing about it. And all hell breaks loose. I mean, it's like everyone in the industry was calling me. I got the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Village Voice, like all these people, media reporters, like, what happened? Like, it's kind of like it's two things. It's a hip hop story. It's also a media story. It's a story about turmoil, about media ethics, as you alluded to. It's about all of these things. And now that James has unfortunately made it public, which again, I would never have done that. I would have handled it privately, because that was what my instinct was telling me. But now that can no longer be done. Now everyone knows that this thing happened. So what's going to happen next? It's a very tough moment for me and for everyone around, at that time. What really happened was all of the editorial staff had a meeting. I think I went to one of the meetings, but then I think there was another meeting without me, because I was more like,
did you guys have an HR at all?
No, we did have somebody, but it wasn't really a real HR. It was, it was a very, we were.
But it's like Maze in the office, as you guys are like,
there was
Julius Caesar style, like
it was kind of like that. There was like a giant split, and like half the company went one way and half the company went the other way. And
got it.
When it came down to it, I had to make a very difficult decision. which was, given that now this information was out there, on top of it, the entire editorial staff had voluntarily left their jobs. So now that means there was other people there. There was a guy named Rob Marriott, Carter Harris, Kieran Mayo, Chris Calloway was the art director, Chimo Du, Maddie C. There's a whole lot of people, Reggie Dennis. All of them had said, you know what? We're not even going to work here anymore because Dave needs to go. And I'm like, I hear you, but he's like, he owns a big chunk of this magazine, dude. Like, I mean, you know, what are we going to do about it? And they were like, that's your problem. You figure that out, you know, kind of thing. So I was really isolated.
So they put the pressure on you to, well, you don't have a staff or anything to vote him out or anything, do you?
Exactly. I was left in a very isolated position because the staff had already decided, we're done. Fuck this. We don't care about, you know, we're not going to work in a place that does this. And I agreed with them. I understood their anger. I was angry too. But also I was a co-owner, as was James and Ed Young. We were all co-owners. So I had two hats on. I had my editorial, you know, hat, which was, and my friendship with him after all these years. Like, how could you do this? And I don't think Dave even realized like how serious, like what he had done. Like, I don't think he even knew the effect. He definitely did not anticipate the reaction. And I was left in a very difficult position of what do I do? So after thinking about it for quite a long time, a few weeks, you know, a couple of very stressful weeks, I decided I want to get bought out. I'm done. It was a hard decision, but once I made it. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to be able to go back to work and pretend everything's okay. I'm going to have to, if I were to go back to work, I'd have to hire a bunch of new people. I'd have to still work under this now, you know, potentially corrupted, you know, structure now and this and that. And I just made the decision I wanted to get bought out. It took a long time for that deal to get done. It took maybe a year for that whole process to unfold. I remember seeing you right around the time that I made this decision, and you were in a studio somewhere. Do you remember this? Or you
we're probably in Battery Studios, I think.
You were. It was Battery. Yes, correct. And I remember. I can't remember why I was sitting with you, but I went up in the studio, and you and I think your engineer were very curious, as was everybody. And I got it. I understood. You were like, "What happened? Like, dude, what happened?" And I probably told some version of the same story, you know. And
yeah, the source was my Illmatic. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
yeah.
It's, I mean, look, it's not the way that I would have wanted to leave the source. But if I'm being totally honest, you know, as I think back on those years, I had already begun to feel a sense that I wanted to maybe move on. You know, it wasn't necessarily, definitely not under that circumstance, but there was a period of time about a year before that when I did actually take like a 2-month hiatus. And I went to Philly and tried to write other stuff. I was interested in writing screenplays and other things. So I went and pursued that for a while.
Was there ever a thought that you guys would just collectively start another magazine?
That was a thought. You know, James and Reggie ended up starting XXL about like a few months after that. And then they lasted about a month. And then they had a falling out with that publisher. And then I actually am the one that recommended Elliot Wilson for the job, because the people from Harris Publications who were also acquaintances or friends of mine were like, hey man, do you want to come? I was offered the job to go run XXL and I didn't want to do it, but I proposed that Elliot Wilson would be the best candidate. And he ended up being a great person to do it, obviously. But yeah, that was it, man. I decided to get bought out. Again, I wasn't, you know, I didn't anticipate that would happen, but you know, it was that's what happened. And I, you know, and I accepted that. And we eventually reached a deal, for a small 7-figure sum. And, that was it.
So in retrospect, well, actually, there's one thing I wanted to, were you part of the first, never spoken about, but the first Source Awards?
Correct. I was part of the first, but not the second. So I was there for the first.
The first was a little crazy too, yo.
First was insane. Also, the first was late '93.
Were you there for that Tupac Tribe moment?
Yes, I was there for the. That was at. I think it was where. What theater was that in?
It was at Madison Square Garden.
Right, right.
I
That's right.
yeah, I went there as a spectator, and I think I've told this story before. Like there wasn't a Tupac Tribe thing. What I believe happened was that as Tribe was coming up to accept their award for Midnight Marauders,
Right.
someone accidentally queued up Tupac's song,
Yeah.
and he did whatever the I don't give a fuck song, whatever. But from the audience point of view, it looked, and this is like after the legend of the KRS-One PM Dawn situation or whatever,
Oh
which
yeah.
I still don't. I've heard variations of that story that it wasn't as, it's like they were both booked on the show. I don't know, but it seemed like Tupac was just like, "Yo, fuck that," and the music came on cue. It was like Bishop had come to life, and then the Zulu Nation had some words, and then but it was squelched. But at the time in the audience, I thought someone was about to pop off between, Tupac and Tribe, but it wasn't
That
the
whole
case at all.
that you're right. That whole show was very chaotic. We didn't know what we were doing. Again, we were like, I think I had written the scripts for what they were saying, and like I remembered as soon as the thing started, I realized they were all too wordy. It wasn't
In
until
over
like the
your
show.
head.
Wasn't until the show actually begun and the audience was there that I realized that all the writing I had done was like 3x too long. Like I was, I
Made
was
for
like,
a mirror
shit.
only.
I was like, I messed up. And up there is like Cool Herc is trying to like get through like some sentences that I wrote, and he gets
Yeah.
all frustrated and and I just remember being very uncomfortable, but it wasn't quite as extremely bad as the next one, but it was a similar, very chaotic moment, event.
What were your thoughts of 1995? I've probably gone on record stating that, kind of in a joking, but as the years go by, sort of serious, where if I were to mark the time or the sand in the, you know,
Yeah.
where I felt the hip hop that I once loved was now like out of my reach, even though, 95 was still a dope ass year. And, Lord knows I thrived, but something about being in, first of all, were you there at all without me knowing?
I was not there. I obviously I was at that point. It was really right in the aftermath of this whole breakup that was going on. I remember getting a zillion phone calls. I was not there, but I got a million phone calls from people who
Updates.
were telling me all the crazy stuff
They
and
fighting.
yeah, all that stuff. But yeah, I wasn't there for that. But yeah, it was, I remember thinking, not being super surprised because of knowing how bad the first one was, that it was kind of like more of the same. Not how bad, but how chaotic
Yeah.
it was. And yeah, it wasn't that much of a shock, but I definitely remember like reacting to that, as I also remember from the PM Dawn incident too. That I wasn't there
Were
for that.
you there?
No, but I was very close with KRS. I was like, KRS was kind of my hero, and he still is. KRS was, my most important rapper in my life. He's the guy that I always looked up to. And so I interviewed him actually 24 hours later. After that incident, I was the first person to interview KRS, and I wrote a story that became a cover story where he was on fire. He was going after
I
everybody.
remember that shit. I
Yeah.
remember.
He was going after X-Clan. He was going after poor righteous teachers. He was going after, of course, PM Dawn. He went after everybody, and he had like a stack of beefs, and he just was like just one after the next. And yeah, I mean, that was when KRS was the king of rap. I mean, he was definitely the all of hip hop embodied in one person.
But before I wrap, and one, I really want to thank you. You're being super generous. I love the fact that Bill, you didn't even remind me that we're almost getting into Jimmy Jam territory.
I was gonna say, like, this is like a 10-parter now. This is like the almanac of the source history. I'm happy to
Dude,
have
I
watched it.
purposely did
Great.
not look at the clock. One, I'm shocked that neither Jake
Steve
nor
is
never
walking around the
mind.
city.
Wait, I'm sorry. I'm seeing I'm at work
Yeah.
right now.
I should have known that this was going to go long.
Like
Yeah,
Steve is walking to work. They're like
Yeah,
expecting me on the floor. This is an act of rebellion I'm doing right now.
It's perfect. It's
I
perfect
don't-
source material.
I don't dog. I've been waiting for this conversation for at least 30 years, yo. Like this
All
is
good.
important.
I got two guys here in my office with me. They've been patient the whole time too. Everyone, for those who are still awake and still listening, I thank you for getting this far.
Trust me, there's an audience for this. But before I wrap though, just in quick retrospect, what if you could name like 3 magic moments that we probably don't know about? Like, I don't know if you're there for the sequencing of a classic album, or you were there to witness an incredible show, or just in your prime source memories.
Well, I'll come up with at least one, which is
Okay.
we're talking about KRS, and I remember this was a really important moment for me. Is while we were still at Harvard, the source was born, but it was still in its very early stages, and I had got a call from Layla Turkin.
Layla, yeah.
Yes, who had one of the publicity companies you mentioned earlier, and she was like, "Hey, is there any chance that you could help KRS come to Harvard?" And I was like, "Of course! Like, I would want nothing more in my entire life than to do that." And that incident became something I think about as a pivotal moment in my life. Basically, I I went to the Black Student Organization of Harvard and tried to get them to endorse a KRS-One speaking engagement. This is the undergraduate Black students of Harvard, and I had a friend who was part of that committee. So he brought me in, and I presented the opportunity. I was like, there's at that point the source had maybe like a year under its belt or something. It had about like 8 issues or something like that. And I said, I said, I have a chance to bring this, everyone knew who KRS was, the leader of hip hop, the most important artist. He's going to come to Harvard. And they were like, okay, that sounds great. We'll get back to you. And then they talked about it. And the guy got back to me and he said, "Hey man, I got bad news. They're not going to do it." I'm like, "What?" They said, "Yeah, they're worried about violence and getting a bad name on the, for the student organization." And I'm like, "What?" This was during the time when, everybody thought if you have a rapper, it means like you're going to get violence and all the, it was back in the stereotype of, some of it, and maybe there's some truth to it, but they didn't want to do it. So I'm like, what am I going to do? And so I meet somebody who says, "Oh no, there's another organization you can go to. It's the Kennedy School of Government, which is one of Harvard's graduate schools. And they have a Black student organization, which this other friend of mine was part of." So he's like, "Come into that one." So I come into that one and they said, "Yes, we'll do it." So the night happens. They set up the event. It is packed. There's like every seat is full. It is absolutely, there's probably like 1,000, 2,000 people there.
And what year is this?
I think this is 89. I believe this is 1989.
All right, blueprint time. Okay.
Yep. And and they have like placards for everyone on the panel. And there's a whole panel. And literally it's every like Cornell West, Henry Louis Gates. It's every like Black intellectual professor, like
Black
legend,
luminaries.
lined up on the stage. And there's a slot for KRS, and he's not there. He's missing. The entire room is filled. All the other people are on stage, and KRS is missing. And I am the only link to KRS. So you can imagine how I was feeling. Stress level through the roof. And this is the days before the internet, before cell phones. Okay. So I basically was stressing my ass off. Okay. I had put this whole thing together. I was, the main reason they were doing this, and he's not even there. So I'm standing in front of this building, and like the time comes, the start time comes, he's not there. 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes. I'm like, I am dead. I can never, like, I have to, like, what's going to happen? And then after like 50 minutes, I look in the distance and I see a cluster of people. And I realize that's him. It's like the Pied Piper. Like he's walking through the streets and all
Right.
these kids are following him. And it's like, KRS, KRS. And he walks in and I'm like, Chris, what's up, man? Where were you? He's like, what? I got on the plane. I'm here now. Like, what's the big deal? It's all good. You know, I'm like, no, you don't understand. Like, there's a crowd. Come on, right now, right now. So he says, here, take this. And he hands me, and this shows you the time period, a giant VHS video recorder, like with literally a VHS popped in, like over the shoulder, giant heavy ass camera. So he hands it to me.
What?
Because he's like, hey, tape this for me, please. He hands it to me. We walk into the building. The event has already been now 45 minutes underway, but they get the first glimpse of KRS and the whole crowd just roars, standing ovation. It was almost like better because he was late. It made it even more impactful. He gets up there and he gives this amazing like monologue about hip hop and Black history and America and politics and everything.
Does this wind up being the interstitials that will wind up on edutainment?
No, but it was similar time frame. So I'm sure
Okay.
it was what was on his mind around that time. Okay. And then what happens is he gives this amazing speech, and then there's some questions and a little back and forth, and it's going very well. And then a Black woman in the crowd stands up and asks a question, and she says, we got two white boys on campus running a rap magazine. We're not happy about that. I want to know what you think about that. And it was like this it was like after all this shit had happened, now, okay, this like pivotal moment in my life, man. I had already, as we told in this story, been already devoted to hip hop for years now. And KRS looks at me and he knows me, you know, and he looks at the crowd, he looks at the girl and he says, I know who you're talking about. He's like, I know those guys. And I have a question for you. Instead of asking, why are they doing it? Why don't you ask, why aren't I doing it? Those guys work their ass off. I know those guys. They love hip hop. They work their ass off every day, you know, to do this magazine. And I beg you, please outdo them. Please, if you can do a better job, I beg you, please do a better job. We need more voices. We need more magazines. We need more hip hop in the world, you know? And it was like this pivotal moment for me. And it validated what we had been doing. It gave me the confidence to move on, to keep going. And then later, after the whole event had done, I was sitting alone with KRS in like a diner in Harvard Square. And again, the source was very young. We were all still very new. Right. And I said to him, man, listen, like, you know, how much it meant to me that you said those things and that, you know, you're here and that kind of, and then I said, would you be willing to like be our spokesperson? And there was a period of time when he agreed, and he actually did. He became almost like the spokesperson for the source. That was only for like a short period, but that whole experience obviously had a huge impact on my the rest of my career.
Wow. Are there any retrospect regrets in terms of your contributions to the source that you wish you could have, you know, corrected? I don't know, the TLC cover or the
That's a good one. Yeah.
No, I had no problem with that. But I'm just saying, like, just in general, like, is there like, man, I wish I did a Souls of Mischief issue before I left, or like, are there any like?
Well, you know, it's the problem with the TLC cover was that they were green. Their skin was green because it was a bad printing job. That was the problem. The printer did a terrible job, and for some reason their skin was like green. But the real reason there was obviously that was the first R&B group that we put on the cover, so we did get a lot of flack. But I don't regret that. I don't regret that because that was, you know, that was how hip hop was moving at the time, and it was a normal evolution. You know, like I guess as I alluded to earlier, you know, I do wish that that the ending had been more graceful or more, you know, positive. And
what is your status with Maze now today? Like, have y'all spoken? Are you civil?
we're civil. We're civil.
Okay.
We've spoken a few times. He made an effort in recent years to be more, I think, appropriate in terms of his perspective on things. I think he kind of came around and realized that, you know, mistakes have been made, and he was kind of more conciliatory in recent years than he had been in the past. But obviously, I mean, we're not going to get into it all today, but I've gone on to do a lot of other things in the music
I know.
industry.
I didn't know
It's
it was going
okay.
to be a
Nah,
9
it's all
hour.
good. It's all good.
Sorry.
Another time we can talk about it. It's all
It's
good.
Power
But
99's fault, man. I'm sorry. I
yeah,
thought I was going to go dive right in.
yeah, I do. But I mean, you know, real quick, I do music for businesses now. I have a company called Playback Prodigy, which is background music for businesses. We have hundreds and even over 1,000 locations around the world. So, but anyway, I work with a ton of DJs.
Wait, you
and all that
technically
stuff.
mean when I hear background music in the supermarket or that sort of thing, or like
Mostly high-end hospitality places. So we do the music for Wynn Resorts. We do the music for MGM Resorts. We do the music for Soho House.
so when I
anytime you're
check
in
into a
Soho House,
hotel,
when you're in a hotel, we do
that's
music for tons of fancy
Your high-end
restaurants in
hotels.
New York, LA.
The Enya
Yeah.
soundtrack that I hear. Yo,
Yes.
I'm secretly obsessed with that world, man. Like,
I figured you'd be curious about that. Yeah, because it's a great perspective on like music, and it forces me to stay current and also to be able to go back, because there's some people that want yacht rock and soul, and some people want, you know, cutting edge hip hop, and some people want pop, and some people want house music, and whatever it is, we
so
do
you're
it.
a professional curation,
Correct.
music curator. Is there licensing that has to happen with that, or is it just like this restaurant says, hey, I need da 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 music for 3 hours in a loop, and you guys
No,
know?
we license. We pay all of the appropriate agencies. You know, we pay the PROs, ASCAP, BMI, CSAC. You know, we pay everybody that we have to pay to license the music. That's one of our expenses, you know, running this business. But for the most part, it's, you know, it's hardware, software, content. So we do the whole thing. But in the end, it's about having good taste in music and picking what's appropriate for
See,
a certain setting.
I didn't know that one could actually monetize off that, because the amount of restaurants that I frequent that are just like, Ahmir, can you send me one of your playlists that I hear about so much? And I'll be like, yeah, sure. And I'll make them a 5 hour playlist and they'll be playing it. I didn't realize that is a business.
Yeah, I've been doing this for about 8 years,
If
9
I can
years.
get a job with you,
Please, I would love nothing more than be able to say playlist by Ahmir Questlove Thompson.
I got a job, y'all.
That would be our greatest
That's what you
you know, feature ever if we were able to say that. But yeah, for sure, man. It's kind of like being a DJ behind the curtain. It's like Wizard of Oz. Like you get to be the DJ, but no one sees you. You know, you're like, it's kind of fun.
Wow. Okay. No, I'm excited about that. You think I'm joking? I'm not.
I will talk.
I'm all I love is curating. Yo, Shek, man. I first of all, all right, now that you open that door, I have so many more questions about that, but I technically have to get to work right now.
Okay.
This is the longest 4 hour lunch break I've, but very much well worth
This
it.
is epic.
Yeah, man. I didn't realize I knew it was going to be epic. Now that I'm in the space that I'm in, I'm really hoping, just putting it out there, that that perhaps you two can come to some sort of agreement in terms of at least setting the legacy right. You know, this is the time where
Yes, with the
everything that
sourcing.
you described,
Yeah.
I would love to see this told Mad Men style, or I believe that this is almost a 6-season episodic series that you told. And I'm certain the stuff you didn't tell me was even, you know, worth it. But no, just in general, man, I want to thank you for your contribution to that magazine, and you know, that magazine, especially being a pivotal moment in my life in terms of what I wanted to do for a living, and something to look forward to and to aspire to be. And the shit literally has me here right now interviewing you, man. I want to thank you for that. And that's kind of why this was a lengthy interview, not just a 45 minutes. So tell me where you started. Like,
No,
thanks, man.
I'm great. Thank you. I appreciate all you guys for having me on, and also in particular, Ahmir, for representing, what I think Philly does represent, which is a love of music, a knowledge of music, a respect for music. Like growing up in Philly, that's what's it's in the water, as we say, WARTER.
Water, yes.
It's in the water. It's basically, we love music in Philly. And if you go back to Philly today, we're still playing the classics. You walk into a store that you hear like Luther Vandross or It Takes Two or Bruce Springsteen or whatever, you know what I mean? It's going to be like, we just love the classics in Philly, and there's it's in the water. And I am grateful for all the things that you and your colleagues have done to be a positive force in the world of music. So thank you.
So, Jonathan.
Yes, sir.
How many mics would you give The Source as a magazine?
Wow.
In your time period and then overall?
Great question, man. I mean, it was worth a 4-hour wait for that one. Okay. I often say that my golden era is The Source's golden era. So I think that I did an issue called the Decade of Rap, which came out in 1990. It was a look back
80 to 90, right?
1980 to 1990. That was my senior thesis at Harvard, was that issue of The Source. So I would say from that issue until the time I left, 5 mics, because we did everything. Now, I have no comment on what happened after I left because I had nothing to do with it, thank God. But basically, I think that our time period, 4.5 to 5, Ahmir said 4.5 is cool. Yeah. But, I do think that time period in my life is a 5 mic time period. And it's like, what I look back is my golden era. So I'm very grateful for it.
Is there a place where I can collectively get, like, my one dream is to see the entire Source canon as a volume set? Or
great question. I think
you own every issue. Like, do you have boxes? And
yes, I have boxes. And as my colleagues here in Vegas see, I have all kinds of shit, man. I got boxes of pictures, records, autographed by everybody, gold records, promo material, and also all the issues and also all the internal stuff. I have a whole lot of internal documents about when we were making the issues and all that stuff. And I would like to. The Source has a new owner, a guy named Londell McMillan, and he is.
I'm familiar with Londell.
You know who Londell is. So Londell, I would like to say
Prince Lander, no Prince.
He protects Prince. He protects Prince very, very assiduously.
Yeah.
But yes, I will say that Londell, you heard what Questlove just said. Let's put every issue. I'm only talking about mine. So let's just say the first.
So 50, he owns the IP right now.
The first 50 issues of The Source, which is roughly my time period, a little bit more than that. I think I did like 54, 55 issues, something like that. So the first 50 whatever issues from that 1980 to the one that had Cool Herc, Bam, and Flash on the cover, which is the hip hop history issue. Between those two, I would like to put all those online for free. I don't want to make money from it. I just want the world to have it. I want to put them online for free. The only person that can give me the green light is Londell. So Londell, let's do it for the sake of history. Let's do it for the sake of the legacy, and also let's make it searchable so that people can, if you want to look up like Large Professor, you can type in Large Professor and you see all the pages he's on, But yeah, that's what we need to do.
Your mouth to God's ears. All right, Londell, you heard it here first.
What the heck? This show's still going on?
Yeah, man, get out of here. All right, y'all, we got to sign off. John, thank you on behalf of Bill and Unpaid Steve. Yeah, that sounds about right. This is Questlove. We'll see y'all next week.